carry that with you everywhere.
Will there be music?
Just go? Okay. Okay, thank you. Welcome to the Voter Education Coalition Primary Forum. The Voter Education Coalition is a nonpartisan organization that sponsors candidate forums, meet and greets, and other events to educate citizens about candidates and their policies. You can learn more about the VEC events by visiting their Facebook page at facebook.com/VECDGKS. I'm Ann Gardner. I'm going to be the moderator today. The forum is being televised live on Midco Channel 25 and is streaming live at lawrenceks.org/stream. It will also be available on the city's YouTube channel for later viewing. We'd like to thank the City of Lawrence and their staff for the use of the City Commission room today and for all their help in making this event possible. We'd also like to thank the Douglas County Clerk's Office for the district maps that are on display in the lobby and that I understand will be on the screen intermittently as we introduce people. The rules of this forum are simple. I will be asking questions submitted by the VEC partners and audience members. If the audience members have a question, they should put it on the cards that are provided and catch the attention of one of our VEC members, and they'll pick those up. Each question will have a designated response time. At the end of this period, and we'll say what that time is when we ask each question. At the end of the period, you'll hear a bell, and we'll move on to the next candidate or questions. We will rotate the order of responses between each candidate. There will be no rebuttals and no questions between the candidates. I think that that is pretty much the size of it. We can get going here. I want to, and turn off your cell phones. Thank you. The first session of our forum today features Republican candidates for the Kansas House districts in the 42nd District and in the 45th District. In the 42nd District, which includes Eudora and reaches up into Leavenworth County, the two candidates are Jim Carlskent and Lance Neely. We also are have two candidates for the 45th District seat, which kind of wraps around the far northwest part of Lawrence and extends northwest into the county, including Lecompton. And those two candidates are Ronald Thacker and Cynthia Smith. We're going to start with Jim and let everybody have a 2-minute opening statement.
Thank you, Ann, and thank you to the Voter Education Coalition for hosting this forum today. I am Jim Carlskent. As was indicated, I represent the 42nd District. I am the incumbent. I'm completing my second year. I'm a lifelong Kansan. I grew up in the Fort Scott area, grew up on a dairy farm. I was in the U.S. Army during the Vietnam era. I served in Vietnam and was also a recipient of the Bronze Star while serving in Vietnam. I'm a defender of the Second Amendment. I do own guns, and I believe in the responsible gun ownership. I'm a lifelong educator. I was a teacher, coach, principal, superintendent for over 40 years. I've taught school finance at the graduate level to aspiring superintendents, and I was a member of the K-12 Budget Committee, which crafted the budget formula that we're on. I am pro-life. I was endorsed by KFL. I was also endorsed by the Family Policy Alliance. I ran 2 years ago because I felt like the state of Kansas was going in the wrong direction. I'm very pleased that I feel like the last 2 years we have turned the corner and going in the right direction for the state of Kansas. The education bill is still somewhat in flux, but I feel like that we're on the right track and we're making progress. So that's why I'm returning to run again for the 42nd District. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Neely.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lance Neely. Thank you all for coming, and thank you all for tuning in. My wife and I, Melinda, have lived in Tonganoxie for 13 years now. I have 4 children, 1 girl and 3 boys. Proud to say all good Republicans. I am a grandfather of 3, 2 of which were born a little over a month ago. I've been in corrections and security most of my life and a supervisor for at least 25 years of that. I've been involved in the Leavenworth Republican Party for the last 12 years, and I decided to run for state representative when I became unsatisfied with the current representation. We have a serious money management problem and continue to throw money at issues without fixing the problems. I'm undeniably pro-life, and I promise to uphold and defend our constitutional rights like the Second Amendment. I will support our military and veterans completely. My youngest just returned from Kuwait and Syria. My oldest son is a firefighter in Wichita. I will support our first responders completely. If you have any questions or anything that is not covered today, please get in contact with me and I will try and find an answer for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Thacker.
Hi, my name is Ronald Thacker. I was born in Lawrence Memorial Hospital and have lived in Lecompton most of my life being raised. Graduated from Perry Lecompton High School, and then I went to the Navy for 20 years. And now that I'm retired from the Navy, I returned to Kansas, to my hometown in Lecompton, and brought my wife Carmel with me. And our youngest daughter Leah has moved back here with us, so I've done my part to increase the population of Kansas. I have another daughter, Jamie, and her husband's in the Air Force. They're stationed at Fort Bragg, and they have 4 children. So I'm working on the grandchildren thing as well. That's a little bit about where I've been. I went to Bethany College, got a bachelor's in history, political science there, and then I got 2 master's degrees in the Navy, one from the War College in national security and the other in public administration from Troy University. And I came home and I decided to use my GI Bill, so I went to Baker, the other college in Douglas County, and got a bachelor's degree in accounting from Baker University, which I hope to put to use, because that's where I've been. I hope to put it to use. I'm unhappy with the current state. When I moved here, taxes were getting lower, and my taxes have gone up by 20% since I built a house, and that's not counting the part where they reappraised the house. That's just since the house was built. And I'd like to see more responsible use of our money. The education, we've thrown a lot of money at it, but I don't hear anybody talking about the outcome of our students. I think we've lost the focus on our children, and I want to put them first. And there are a lot of things to do to look at that, but just arguing about money isn't the only thing to do. Another thing I'm in favor of is term limits. I think that some of the legislatures have been in Topeka too long, and they need to call it a day and let somebody else come in. And lastly, I'm endorsed by Kansans for Life and the Family Policy Alliance, and I anticipate being endorsed by the National Rifle Association. Well, they're not doing endorsements this year. I anticipate an A grade on a questionnaire from them. Thank you all for coming out. I appreciate all my friends in the audience in particular, and I'd get out and vote.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Smith.
Hello, I've lived in Lawrence for 23 years. I'm an attorney and I've covered the State House for almost 15 years, most recently for the SCL Health System, which is a faith-based group of hospitals and health clinics. My husband is Scott Smith and he's a teacher at Free State High School. I'm running because it's time to improve the results coming from the legislature. Kansas has been in a perpetual budget crisis. The school funding dispute has gone on too long. These issues have been toxic for our state, and it's time to change that. I have the expertise and the problem-solving skills to do the job. First, I believe lawmakers need to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. We can't keep spending the way we have been, and comparisons to other states show our spending is out of whack, that we can rein in taxes as long as we control spending. I want laws that allow Kansans to prosper. That means exercising restraint in the burdens our government places on people and the businesses we value here. On social issues, I am a moderate. I don't think it makes sense to talk about restraint in government, but then turn around and judge who is a family. I respect the Second Amendment, but I'm eager to do what we can to make our schools safe. I support expansion of Medicaid to provide the working poor access to health care. Finally, I want Lawrence to matter. We need Lawrence and the communities in the 45th District to matter in Topeka. If we are to have any say in what happens, we need to send a Republican to the State House. The fact is the Republicans are the majority party in Kansas, so we're in charge of the agenda, We're in charge of what the legislature chooses to work on. If you are a Republican, know that I am the right choice to keep this seat Republican. If you are an independent, voting in the primary, please know this: Lawrence needs me in the State House. I am a moderate Republican you can feel good about. I look forward to earning the votes of listeners this afternoon.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to jump into our questions here. We kind of have a rotation here that will allow the two candidates in each race to answer the questions together, because we thought that would be a good way for you to compare. And I was remiss in not thanking our timekeeper, Julie Hack, who is here keeping track of all our timing on this. Our first question, and some of you kind of addressed this in your opening remarks, but we'll give you another chance to expand on that for 2 minutes. When did you file to run, and what went into that decision? Why did you decide to run? And we'll start with Ms. Smith, sorry.
I decided to run when I heard that Tom Sloan was retiring his seat. I mean, he's been a good legislator for us in the district for a long time, and I sat down with Tom Sloan and talked to him about it before I filed, and he supports my campaign. He knows that I know my way around the State House, and I'd really be able to hit the ground running to be the legislator that takes over for him.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Thacker.
Hi, I filed on May 30th, and it was a tough decision. I didn't want to run. I went to a meeting with a person I thought was going to help their campaign. I went to that meeting with several other people, and at the end of that meeting, my friends were telling me that I had to run. I tried to talk another gentleman into running, and then he joined the bandwagon. I'm running because I feel like the Republican Party is not being represented in the 45th District, so that's why I got in the race at the last minute. I'm a little behind, but I'm catching up fast as far as websites and signs and those nice things.
Okay, thank you. We'll switch over to the 42nd District now, and Mr. Neely.
I ran because of what I kept hearing about the representation within the 42nd District. My opponent had ran on basically 3 things, and out of those 3 things, he failed miserably on 2 of them, and that being lower taxes and on the Second Amendment. He has since received a F rating from both the NRA and the Kansas Rifleman Association, and has voted for the largest tax increase in the state of Kansas history, and that's the reason that I ran.
Do you recall when you filed? That was part of the question.
The exact date, I don't remember what exact date was. I think it was a week before the filing date was due.
Okay,
before.
that's good enough. Thank you. And Mr. Carl Skent.
I filed on, I think it was April the 7th this year. It was right at about the time when we had the break. And my reason for filing was that 2 years ago, when I made the choice to run against the incumbent, the state was a mess. We were looking at $1 billion in debt. Our credit rating had been downgraded 2 times. Schools were being underfunded. They were on the block grant. They had been frozen for 2 years. That was my choice to run. And when I went to the legislature, it was a rewarding experience to be involved in the K-12 Budget Committee. I was on that committee. I feel like we made progress. We did have to raise taxes. The last tax increase was a sales tax, and no one in the legislature at that time would admit that there was a problem. They just kept making the same mistake, time and time again. And so we did have to raise taxes, and we didn't raise them as high as they were in 2012 before the Brownback tax experiment started, but we reset them. They are currently lower than they were in 2012 before the tax experiment started. We made some progress, and we're funding roads, we're funding schools, we're giving some money back to where it needs to go. So I wanted to continue the progress we've made. I don't want to go backwards. And many want to turn it back to what it was back in the old days of the Brownback tax experiment, and I'm opposed to that. That's why I'm running again.
Okay, thank you. We'll start with Mr. Neely on this next question. The question is, what committees do you want to serve on, and/or feel most qualified to serve on? And that's a 90-second answer, please.
I would like to be involved on the Education Committee. I would like to be on the Agricultural Committee. I've been involved in corrections and security, so anything I can, any of the committees that I can use my experience with that, I would enjoy being on those also.
Okay. Mr. Carlskin?
Currently, I'm on the K-12 Budget Committee. I'm also on the Agriculture Committee. I'm on the Federal and State Affairs Committee. I would, first of all, my primary focus would be go back to K-12 budget, because I've taught school finance at the doctorate level. I feel I'm one of the few legislators that really understands school finance and how it works. So I would certainly like to go back to K-12 budget. Agriculture Committee is of interest to me. I live in the country. A lot of my district is agriculture. We were very much involved in fighting the Tyson expansion in Leavenworth County. I sponsored legislation, and it didn't get passed through the legislature, but I'd like to go back and work on that to continue. Federal and State Affairs is a very controversial committee, and I wouldn't mind going back to there. But K-12 budget and ag would probably be my main focus right now.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to the 45th District and go to Mr. Thacker, please.
Well, obviously, I'd be interested in the Federal and State Affairs Committee. I have a lot of qualifications there, a lot of experience dealing with those sort of things. I'm also interested in agricultural, although my interest there is a little more unique. Douglas County has a lot of really big farmers, and those people are well represented by organizations like Farm Bureau, which I'm a member of. But there's also a lot of small hobby farms, if you will, in this area. There's a lot of beekeepers, there's a lot of small fruit farms, and various other industries like the pumpkin patch. And I'm interested in being on the Agricultural Committee to carry their perspective as much as the big farmers, not that the farmers aren't important. And lastly, any budget committee. The K-12 would be an interesting one, but I have a very strong financial background, 20 years of government finance, bachelor's in accounting, and I would really like to put my expertise to work helping the state of Kansas figure out, is it using its money efficiently?
Okay, thank you. Ms. Smith?
Yeah, I am an expert in healthcare policy, so I think the Health Committee would be a good choice for me. Also, the Social Services Budget Committee, which is actually where the dollars are decided on health issues. I worked the State House for a time for Kansas City Power and Light, so I know a lot about energy and utility issues, and they were fascinating to me. So I think the Energy and Utilities Committees would be committees I'd like to serve on. I'd also like to serve on Fed and State. It seems to just have the most interesting issues. So I know it's a committee in big demand and not likely for a freshman legislator, but I think that'd be a really great committee to serve on too.
Okay, great. This next question, we will start with Mr. Thacker, just so that you are forewarned here. The question is, Senate Bill 284, the Adoption Protection Act, which was signed into law recently, allows allocation of state adoption funds to agencies that have sincerely held religious beliefs that would exclude same-sex couples. Do you believe this is a discriminatory use of state tax dollars? Why or why not?
The adoption in Kansas, there are way more kids looking for homes than there are homes to take the kids. The state government alone cannot solve the problem. They need the help of charitable organizations. And the charitable organizations that have been at the forefront of adoption and helping children find homes have usually been religious-based, faith-based, whichever way you want to say it. And they are a big part of the solution. So yes, I support this bill. I think it's fine that they are able to exercise their religious beliefs and still help the children of Kansas. Now, that's not to exclude the state from other organizations or for single parents. My next door neighbor is a single parent, a man raising a young girl, and you talk about a person that has his hands full and is challenged, and he had to adopt her through a complicated situation. So it's good that the faith-based organizations are able to exercise their freedom of religion and to help with our problem children.
Okay, I should have said this was a 90-second answer, but you were well within, so you're fine. Ms. Smith?
I agree with what he just said. people don't realize the faith-based organizations are the ones that used to handle all the adoptions in our state. So to pull them out of the process would not be a good idea. The religion is something that the state can't do anything about, how they feel about same-sex couples and such. But I think that they should continue the good work that they're doing. There are other agencies that people can go to. As long as that exists, I think we should continue to allow those faith-based agencies to operate.
Okay, we'll go over to the 42nd District. Mr. Neely first, please.
Well, they've covered it pretty well, but I would agree with the part that she just brought up about that there are other agencies that they can go to that are not faith-based, and they have an opportunity to go to those agencies, and it would not trample on the rights or the beliefs of the faith-based, and therefore I agree with the bill. So.
Okay, and Mr. Carlskin.
I voted for the bill, so naturally I agree with it. One of the things that really frustrates me about this topic is it doesn't change anything. You know, we're doing exactly what right now, and it won't and it will not change anything. People are saying that, you know, you're prejudiced if you voted for the bill. This is not an issue of prejudice. It is an issue of getting kids homes. And after the Brownback tax experiment, kids suffered because in the agencies, you know, there's hundreds of thousands of kids that need homes, and we need not take away people that can provide adoption. So this bill, you know, it got a lot of publicity, and for what exact reason I really can't say, but when passed, it doesn't change anything. We're doing what we will continue to do that we're doing right now. So, and I did vote for it.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go back to Mr. Carlskin for our first answer to the next question, which is a 90-second answer. Do you support Medicaid expansion in Kansas? Why or why not?
I did 2 years ago in 2017. I voted for Medicaid expansion. In fact, AFP is going out of its way right now to make myself and other moderates look bad for voting. They're dropping postcards, you know, across the districts, you know, where we voted. And my reason for voting for it was that the state of Kansas is losing billions of dollars. It's going to the federal government. We've got people that are in need of support. We've got hospitals that are in danger. In fact, we have some closing. We've got people that are being neglected. You know, people say, well, it's, you know, Kansas are backing Obamacare. I'm not backing Obamacare. What I'm doing is helping the people of the state of Kansas to get medical support. The bill that we had in front of us in 2017 was a control bill. It was modeled after the Indiana state bill that Vice President Pence put in place when he was there. So it is more of a moderate type bill to look at. And in 2018, there was a gut-and-go attempt to put it into the legislature. It was not heard in committee, and I voted against that. So some people say I'm inconsistent because I voted for it once and I didn't vote for it again. There's certainly reasons why I didn't vote for it the second time, because it was a gut-and-go. It wasn't heard in committee, and we need to fix it, and that way wouldn't have fixed it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Neely.
I would not support it. I believe that it is a financial disaster for the state of Kansas, and I think it would make it to the point where we would have to once again increase taxes to an enormous amount. I don't think it's sustainable, and I think it also pulls money away from giving money to able-bodied people that would be then put on it, and takes away from the people that genuinely need it. So no, I would not support it.
Okay, thank you. We'll switch to the 45th District and Mr. Thacker.
I'm against the Medicaid expansion. I don't think it's the role of government. We need to get health care to people, and Medicaid is arguing about an insurance policy. It interferes with the private market. We have private insurance companies that should help, and really the best way to help our citizens is to get our economy rolling and to get insurance affordable through regulations and through, whether it be through your work or through the ability to purchase insurance as a group of people unaffiliated. There's a lot of laws that are in the way of people getting health insurance. And my daughter, my youngest daughter, she really struggled because when she came here and tried to be a college student, she went on COBRA, and that was not the best insurance policy. Medicaid is not the answer. It is, the government is inherently inefficient, and we're better off to let the markets work and let the private insurance companies have a chance to compete in a fair market.
Okay, and Ms. Smith?
Well, like I said, I worked for a group of safety net hospitals, and I won't unlearn what I learned there, and healthcare access is a passion of mine. I would expand Medicaid. The working poor have no healthcare option, and expanding Medicaid would promote healthier communities. Hospitals, they need to get paid. We have left nearly $2 billion on the table, and that's money that came out of all of our pockets just to dig in our heels against this Medicaid expansion. When they don't have a place to go, when they don't have insurance, they're going to go to the emergency room and they're going to get the most expensive care. And that's just a system that makes no sense. We're not really talking about wealthy people who we're putting on Medicaid. We're talking about the working poor who can in no way afford health insurance, so they go bare. I think it's something that we really need to get done, and I'm not optimistic that we're going to get that done.
Okay, thank you. We're going to come back to you first on this next question, which is a long question, so pay attention. It'll be a 2-minute total answer on these. On June 25th, the state Supreme Court ruled that the legislature met its responsibility to equitably distribute school funding, but it still requires the legislature to meet the adequacy requirement in Article 6 of the state constitution. This means the legislature will have to address this issue in the next session. 2 questions based on that. Do you agree with the Supreme Court decision? Why or why not? And do you support a constitutional amendment that would limit the court's authority over school funding by declaring the power to establish adequacy of financing for education as exclusively within the legislative power of the state? Why or why not? Okay?
I could almost answer those questions in reverse, because one of the reasons I think the Supreme Court decided the way it did is because it saw the threat of the constitutional amendment hanging over its head and really pulling away all of its power. So I think that I agree with the decision. I just read the decision actually again this morning because I knew we'd be asked questions about it. And you know, they did a very thoughtful job of evaluating the state's thinking process and how they decided on funding. Basically, they went back to where the Supreme Court had said the funding was adequate and said, well, we're going to take that formula because you said you liked it once and apply it to current day, and this is the numbers that we come up with. The only thing that was left is they didn't add an element for inflation. So they have to add some money to be sure they account for inflation or change the law enough so it accounts for inflation. So I think we're probably past that, but we do need this constitutional amendment, or we do need to put it to the voters. It isn't the legislature that decides whether there's a constitutional amendment. They decide whether to put it to the voters. And apparently our Constitution has some conflict in it where it says the Supreme Court is in charge of this and the legislature's in charge of this. So we need to get our Constitution in order so that it makes sense, and putting it clearly to the voters and letting them decide who should be making the decisions on this. Are you comfortable with the court getting involved the way it has in the past, or should the legislature be the ones trusted to decide on education funding? So I do support putting that question to the voters.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Thacker, same question.
I think the Supreme Court in Kansas has overstepped its constitutional authority. The financial matters are clearly in the lane of the legislature. The U.S. federal Constitution and the Kansas Constitution both place the budget and the power of the purse in the legislature, and in the body of the legislature that is most responsive to people, the House, which is elected every 2 years. That's for a purpose so that the budget will reflect the will of the people. The Supreme Court are not educators. They are not budget specialists. They are not legislators. They should not be determining the adequacy or the funding of our schools. I would support to amend the Constitution of Kansas, and I would add the words, as shall be determined by the legislature, in both, to cover both the adequacy and the amount. Inflation, adjustment for inflation, there is no adjustment for inflation in the Kansas Constitution. There is no law that says that government has to spend more money next year than it did this year. The economy does not always grow. We had recently a recession in the last decade, and our government spending did not decrease, it continued to go up. I think we need to leave the education of our children needs to be focused on by professional people that do it, like the Kansas Department of Education. That's the people advising the legislature on what the needs are of the schools. The court's not getting advice from them. The court is making a ruling based on what they want as an outcome. And as an example, they are the most overturned Supreme Court, state Supreme Court in the United States of America. They've been overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court 9 times. So I don't think they're qualified to help our children. I want to put it back on the legislature and the Kansas Department of Education and the voters of the state of Kansas.
Okay, we're shifting to the 42nd District. Mr. Neely.
I agree with Mr. Thacker that I believe that the Supreme Court is overstepping its bounds. I have said before, I completely support a constitutional amendment that would put the funding of K-12 back in the hands of the legislature. I believe that there is plenty of money that has been going to the schools, and that there needs to be some evaluation as to how it's being spent. There has been no data that has shown that increasing the amount of funds that we give to the schools increases test scores or increases their ability to be ready for college. So I would support the constitutional amendment to the Kansas Constitution.
Okay, Mr. Carlskin.
To answer your question regarding the first part of it, on the constitutional amendment, first of all, the Constitution of the state of Kansas has been, it states that to be adequate and equitable. That's in the Constitution, and the Supreme Court is determining that. So with respect to constitutional amendment, I would, when I returned to Topeka, I did a survey in 2017 of my constituents, and I will do it again. If I get a response that they want to vote on it, I would vote for it. But in going to door right now, I'm not hearing that. So, but I want to hear from my constituents. So to say I would or wouldn't, I want to hear from my constituents before I would make that commitment. With respect to what's going on with the state, with the decision that was made, I was on the K-12 budget committee. We worked it. We spent days upon hours on creating that formula. And we did look at the Montoya case back in 2005 to see what was determined equitable and adequate by the court. Because of various things, the recession back in about 2008, the funding wasn't continued, and then when Brownback got his tax experiment in place, it certainly couldn't fund it either. So what we did, we moved up to look at for inflation over those years. I was disappointed that it was overturned. I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed. And the nice thing about it is the Supreme Court did give us credit for understanding what we did. So I think we can fix it, and at the same time without a tax increase. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to the next question, you guys are being very efficient. We're getting to lots of questions, so I wanted to remind our people here at City Hall that if they have questions, they can submit those on cards to some of the VEC members who are here, or if you are at home and watching, you can go to the VEC Facebook page and do the question, submit a question that way. We'll do our next question. We'll go first to Mr. Neely. Do you support reducing or eliminating the state sales tax on food? If yes, how would you accomplish this? If no, why not? 60 seconds on that. Or 60 seconds.
I would like to see it lowered, if possible. As with any tax cut or increase, it needs to be responsible. I think that there needs to be more information and more study as to how this would affect different avenues and stuff that way. But I would like to see it reduced if possible.
Okay, and then to Mr. Carlskin.
I too feel that the sales tax, especially on food, needs to be reduced. When the legislature in 2015 made the choice to increase sales tax by not looking at the experiment that was going on, it was careless, the way it was done. And so I feel like that the sales tax, but especially on food, needs to be reduced. And I think with what's going on with the federal Supreme Court with respect to internet sales tax, I think there's an avenue there where we can relieve some of the pressure on those that are the sales tax, especially on food.
Okay, we'll shift to the 45th District and Mr. Thacker.
Well, sales tax and property tax, real estate tax, and income tax in Kansas, I feel like they're all generally too high. Food tax is a tough one because people that have less income, have less money, have a greater impact on sales tax on food. But if people can't afford the sales tax on food in this state, we need to look at our economy and getting our economy moving. Taxes are certainly a part of the problem. In the last 2 years, with these tax increases, the Kansas economy is slowing while the national economy is accelerating. We need to take a comprehensive look at our tax thing, and the internet sales tax is certainly going to have a big impact. It's going to mean more sales tax on sales, but it's also going to mean less economic activity through the internet. Now that in the long run, that may benefit Kansas because there may be more money leaving Kansas on internet sales than what it'll reduce internet sales in Kansas. But we need to look at food tax in particular. We need to look at, but all of the taxes need to be evaluated.
Thank you. It's the first time we've heard the bell today. Ms. Smith.
Yes, I do believe we need to eliminate the food sales tax, the food and food ingredient sales tax in Kansas. There's actually a lot of bipartisan support for that in the legislature. It's just they put themselves to the test where we can't reduce an amount without finding something to pay for it. And there just hasn't been any room in the budget to do that, even though the legislature has wanted to. But now we have a little bit of room now to eliminate our food sales tax. It's very regressive as a tax. It hits the income of those that don't make as much harder than it hits those who make a lot of money, where they have to pay that extra, 6 or 9 or 10% on food. That really hurts the budget. So this is a regressive sales tax that I think should be the first one that we should eliminate.
Okay, thank you. Next question, we'll go first to Mr. Thacker, and we've got a 90-second answer on this. How could we improve the criminal justice system at the state level?
One of the things, hopefully the people listening are very familiar, Douglas County recently wrestled with expanding the jail and mental health facilities here. And part of that is the criminal justice system itself we don't just need a bigger facility, we need to look at how we're doing business. And one of the things that's been identified is that they don't have enough judges to process the cases in a timely manner in Douglas County. And not only is that a burden for the jail and the law enforcement system and the criminal justice system, the people involved, but it starts to infringe on civil rights of the people that are going through this system because the court's not giving them a timely trial. So one of the things I would like to look at doing overall for the state is to institute a circuit court system where when a place like Douglas County is having a higher caseload than normal, then maybe a judge can be moved here. And then when our caseload drops, that circuit judge would hear cases in another part of the state where they're having a problem. And instead of hiring more permanent judges in every place in the state, move them around a little bit and move through the backlog and keep our costs down at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Smith.
I mean, if you look at the crime and those that we need to jail, so much of it is tied to drug use and abuse. I think if the state has a role in this, it could be to do something about that crisis that we have in our state. I mean, it's really straining the mental health system. It's straining the foster care system. I'm trained as a CASA, and most of the children that go through the system because of abuse and neglect, it's because of drug abuse. So I think that that's a role that the state can have in improving our criminal justice system and being sure that we have the resources that we need. We may not need more resources, we need a different sort.
All right. We'll shift back to the 42nd District and Mr. Neely first.
Well, I completely support what Mr. Thacker said. I think we need to get the additional judges in various places where the traffic is considerably higher. I also believe that we need to support the law enforcement considerably better than we have been in the past, and that being, whether it be stronger laws or equipment or whatever it is that they need. When it comes to the stronger laws, I worked corrections, and at that time, there was about a 75% return to corrections to the facility that I was at. And that's ridiculous. If the people are going to continually commit the crime, then we need to turn around and figure out some other way, whether it be through mental health, whether it be through some other type of reform. We need to figure out why we have such a return of the criminals into the criminal justice system.
Okay, and Mr. Carlskin.
Well, I think the issue of so much crime, and it's been mentioned by the other speakers, has to do with the opioid crisis, the drug abuse that's taken place, and how it affects the kids, all the neglect that's a result of that, and mental health. Mental health services have been crippled, during the Brownback tax experiment. There people have the institutions have not been able to support the kids and others dealing with mental health issues. So those are the areas that I think we need to approach to help the problems.
Okay, we're going to come back to you for the first answer on our next question. It's a 60-second answer, and the question is, do you support the legalization of medicinal cannabis in Kansas? Why or why not?
Do I support the legal medical
Right,
cannabis?
yeah,
Okay.
medical.
Yes, I would support medical. In the Ag Committee, we did the hemp bill this year, which will help with agricultural hemp, and I do feel like that medical cannabis should be the next step to give consideration. There's a great deal of research out there that says it can help, and it's time. The state of Kansas is one of the states that I think there's a lot of support in it, thinking about doing it, but yes, we need to move forward on that.
Okay, and excuse me, I lost my name. It's Mr. Neely.
Absolutely, I would support that. I believe that there are many things that medical marijuana and cannabis can assist with, pain being one of them. And I lost my father this last year, and if there'd have been a way to turn around and alleviate his pain, then I think I would have tried about anything to accomplish that. So I completely support that. I also, the industrial hemp and some of the other things, I think we're on the right track towards getting those things moving along in Kansas. And I think we can move forward and get some more done with it.
Okay, now to the 45th District, Mr. Thacker.
I'd like to start with the industrial hemp. Thank you, Representative Carlskink, for bringing that up, because I think I think something that's time for is that there's no THC or very little THC in industrial hemp. There's tremendous amount of industrial potential, and it's a crop that can be grown here in Kansas, and something that you don't have to have thousands of acres to farm and produce and maybe make a little bit of money, supplement your income. As far as the medical cannabis, when I was younger, I would have been against it. But as I look around this opioid crisis, which is primarily driven by prescription drugs that people become addicted to, and then they find illicit drugs to supplement their habit after they become addicted, I see marijuana as absolutely as a doctor-prescribed medical alternative to that, so that doctors have more options, different people might do different things, and we have to take affirmative steps to combat this opioid crisis. And I see medical marijuana as being a possibility for reducing the amount of prescribed opioids.
Okay, and Ms. Smith?
I do support allowing medical marijuana. there's just so much evidence that it gives relief to people that are in pain or have, medical crisis and maybe are in their last days. That we deny people that kind of relief is tragic. So I do support medical marijuana in Kansas.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back to you for the first answer on this next question. It's a 60-second answer, and the question is, are the current laws governing firearms on state college campuses appropriate? If not, what changes would you support?
Well, I'm not a hunter, and I don't enjoy shooting. I'm not going to be the NRA's favorite person. I know the Second Amendment is, it's really important. It's really important to some people. I am concerned about school shootings and shootings on campus, so I don't think that it's appropriate to be able to carry guns on campus, and I think it's virtually impossible for them, with all the entrances they have, to keep the guns out of the classrooms in universities. So I would support laws that allow campuses like that to be able to prohibit guns to come inside.
All right, Mr. Thacker?
Well, I think the laws are a step in the right direction. I'm a little concerned that people 18 to 20 years old are denied their civil rights by the current law. That being said, the nice lady just said they can't keep the guns out. There's too many entrances, or words close to that. And that's precisely why we need to allow law-abiding, responsible citizens to carry firearms wherever they go. It's just a simple fact that the last public shooting, the police were there within 60 seconds of being called, and 5 people were still murdered by a homicidal maniac that chose a shotgun as his method of killing. There have been other maniacs that have chose other methods that have killed plenty of other people. The quickest way to stop a bad person with any weapon, but especially a gun, is a good person with a gun. You don't have time for the police to arrive. When they get there, they have to figure out who's who. The best thing you can do is to allow law-abiding citizens to protect themselves and exercise their civil rights.
Okay, to the 42nd District, Mr. Neely.
I agree with Mr. Thacker, and I think the key word there is law-abiding. And the additional laws that keep being tried to be put on the books, you can keep putting laws out there, but law breakers will break those laws. Therefore, I would not support any laws that would hinder the ability for people to carry concealed. I do think that they've made a larger issue out of it. I've talked to many students, many people that are on the campuses, and that do carry concealed, but would not consider carrying concealed there for various reasons. So the fact that they keep bringing it up, I think, brings a larger spotlight on the issue than is actually necessary.
Okay, and Mr. Carlskint.
Back in 2017, I voted to keep guns out of mental institutions and hospitals. And the governor didn't do anything with it, so it did become law. I would also support some type of regulation with respect to college campus carry. I feel like anyone that carries a weapon needs to be able to understand how to use it. You know, I believe in the Second Amendment. I'm a gun owner. I've been a hunter during my life. You know, I know how to use weapons. Many people that carry them don't, and that's a concern of mine. I just feel like that you need to show that you know how to use them, and you know how to deal with the issues that arise. So, hope that answers your question.
Okay. Mr. Neely, you'll be the first on this next question. It's a 60-second answer. If Roe v. Wade is overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court, what would your position be on abortion rights in Kansas based on current Kansas law?
Well, I am pro-life, and I think that pretty much answers the entire question right there. I don't think that the state is going to have any ability or authority over such an enormous thing as Roe v. Wade. So I don't think we'll get the opportunity to make any decision on that. As far as support and everything, I am completely and utterly pro-life and would support that as necessary.
Okay, Mr. Carlskent?
I too am pro-life, and I, you know, I don't have a crystal ball to know what's going to happen with the federal Supreme Court. You know, Justice Kennedy is resigning, and we'll see what happens there with the replacement, and then if it comes to a vote. But I'm opposed to abortion.
All right, we'll come over to Mr. Thacker next.
First of all, I see two issues with Roe versus Wade. The first issue, of course, being the 55 million or so babies that have been murdered since it became the law of the land. But there's a states' rights issue on this decision as well. The federal government has overstepped its bounds, the federal Supreme Court in this case. This is clearly something that should be reserved to the states and to the people in accordance with the 10th Amendment. I would like to see the laws in Kansas be stronger. I feel like the Kansas Supreme Court is positioning itself for a decision on Roe versus Wade. It appears to me that they're anticipating it to be overturned, in which case every state will have to come up with its own abortion laws or evaluate its own abortion laws. And I think the Kansas Supreme Court has positioned itself to interpret the word liberty as a right to abortion. Yeah, I appreciate that a pregnancy is a huge medical concern for every woman, but abortion is completely fatal for every baby. And those two things have to be balanced if you're even going to have a conversation with me. I think that Roe versus Wade was a bad decision, and I hope it does get overturned.
And Ms. Smith?
It's my understanding that if Roe versus Wade is overturned, that means the states get to decide whether they want to ban abortion or not. So I think the will of the people in Kansas is going to be to ban abortion. Every abortion is a tragedy, and I support life. I think we're in a world where it doesn't make sense to allow abortion anymore because there's just so many more options for women. I mean, we have a good adoption system. There isn't the stigma attached to it. If there's a health issue, though, I have concerns. I would want to be sure that the health of a woman, even the mental health of a woman in some extreme cases, is preserved. But I think that it's quite likely the state would adopt a law to ban abortion, and I wouldn't get in the way of that.
Okay. This question will go first to Mr. Thacker. 60-second answer. What endorsements have you received from organizations, including PACs?
I've received endorsements for Kansas for Life and the Family Policy Alliance, and I'm hoping to, well, the NRA is not doing endorsements this year. I would have hoped to have an endorsement for them, and possibly Farm Bureau. And other than that, I don't have any on the horizon.
Ms. Smith?
I'm sure, like all the candidates, I've been getting just lots and lots of questionnaires from organizations. And usually they aren't really questionnaires, they're just a list of pledges. And a lot of them, they lump a lot of issues together into one question, and your only choice is yes or no. So I haven't been answering these questionnaires, so I guess I haven't been seeking endorsements. I mean, I'm still learning the details of some of the issues and getting up to speed on what the legislature has done. So I haven't sought any endorsements. I have received some campaign contributions from some groups that I welcome because it gives me the opportunity to run, and they understand that that doesn't mean that I'm always going to vote on their issues in the way they would want me to, but I do appreciate the support. So I haven't sought endorsements from any group.
Okay, thank you. We're going back to Mr. Neely, please.
I was supported by Kansas Right to Life, and then the rest of mine has been, my support has been from mainly individuals and people that were disingenuous with the current representation. So,
Okay. Mr. Carlskent?
The endorsements I received was KFL, Kansas for Life, the Kansas Policy Alliance, the Kansas NEA, Kansas National Education Association, and Mainstream, and the Kansas Republicans for Common Sense. Those are the PACs that have endorsed me.
Okay, thank you. We're going to come back to you for the first answer on this question. It's a 90-second answer. What can the state do to reduce the number of kids in foster care?
What can the state do to reduce the number of kids in foster care? Well, you know, we talked earlier about the adoption, and I do think that the adoption issue needs to be taken care of. But I think the kids in foster care, we have new leadership in the department where, you know, foster care is being overseen, which was desperately needed because it was in a shambles. Kids were being lost, they didn't know where they were. So I do think we're in the right direction there. I think caseworkers, we've increased caseworkers. The legislature appropriated money to increase caseworkers, which was desperately needed. Under the Brownback tax experiment, that was one of the things that got hit with the chopping block. So we're helping kids in that way there. But the bottom line is we need people to find homes to help the kids, as well as the caseworkers to watch over the kids when they're in the care. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Neely?
I believe we need to look into whether or not we're hindering the ability for adoptions. If we can make that process easier or without hindering any responsibility. If it is that we need to get more caseworkers and streamline the speed in which we have the kids in foster care and can get them adopted.
Okay, Mr. Thacker?
Well, adoption is certainly important, and I think involving our faith-based groups is an important help there. But I think my opponent said it best. The problem is on the front end. The problem is drug problems that are putting these kids, that are breaking up homes and putting these kids in the system. And that's where our focus needs to be is I mean, obviously we have to take care of the kids in the system now. That's a crisis right this minute. But in the long term, you asked the question, I believe, was to solve the problem. We need to look at intervening before these kids wind up in the system. We need to, and I think the drug problem is the single biggest issue there.
Okay, and Ms. Smith?
Obviously, I agree with that. It is drug use and drug abuse that puts, I don't know, 80-90% of the kids in foster care. It's because of drug use and abuse. And like I said, I'm a trained CASA. I actually work for the National CASA Association in Washington, D.C., so I know the issue pretty well. And we have wonderful caseworkers in Douglas County. We have attorneys that are very dedicated. They could do different work and make a whole lot more money, but they're very dedicated to working on behalf of the children. And of course, the CASA program in Douglas County is amazing. But really the drug use problem and trying to get these parents in treatment in a way where they can still interact with their children and these families can be preserved.
Okay. We'll come back to you for the first answer on this next question. It's a 90-second answer, kind of a long question. The Supreme Court has held that restrictions on use of the flag in art and protests violate the First Amendment, the United States, U.S. versus Eichmann, 1990. Both Governor Collier and gubernatorial candidate Chris Kobach have suggested that publicly funded institutions should not, quote, promote this type of art. However, it is precisely public institutions like KU that are bound by the U.S. Constitution to refrain from viewpoint censorship. Do you agree with this statement? Why or why not?
Well, I didn't like the flag flying the way it was. I realize our Supreme Court has decided you can do that to our flag and that it has First Amendment protections if it's under free speech. But I'm not so sure that was a free speech message. I think it was just shock art. So that's why it really bothers me so much. And I'm glad that KU took it off the flagpole. They didn't have to. It would have been just one more thing that KU got crossways with Topeka. You know, but KU does have enough image problems with lawmakers, and they really didn't need to fall on their swords over that. I really loved the governor's response, which was to put up all those extra flags around the Capitol, just to show, you know, we love our flag, and we want to be sure that everybody knows that we love our flag. So, you know, I didn't like the flag, so it didn't bother me that the candidates spoke out against what was flying there and on campus.
Okay, Mr. Thacker?
The flag was absolutely offensive. It wasn't art. I know it wasn't art because it wasn't in an art form. It was raised on a flagpole in front of a U.S. government building or government paid-for building. That pole is for one thing and one thing only, the national anthem of the United States of America. I'm fine with their expression of free speech if they do it in the proper form. but it's still desecration of the flag. The person that did it wasn't even an American, it was a German. And I just about bet you money that they didn't do a similar art display with the German flag. And Germany was quite literally divided in half not too many years ago. As far as the reaction to it and the university's responsibility to protect free speech, it's been my experience that Kansas University has been a little selective in who they support and who they deny free speech to. I'll ask you to recall a professor of journalism that threatened violent death to all the children of people from the NRA or their grandchildren. That's not free speech, that's hate speech. And yet the University of Kansas went to great lengths and withstood a tremendous amount of pressure to protect that professor for that heinous statement. I'm sorry, there's a Supreme Court ruling that says you can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater. It's the same thing. Once you've crossed that line from free speech to hate speech, advocating violence is just wrong. And to me, that flag was advocating violence against the United States of America. As a veteran, I find that highly offensive. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll switch to the 42nd District and Mr. Neely now.
I agree with Mr. Thacker. I found it very offensive. I'm glad they took it down. I think they left it up too long. The fact that it was up there at all meant it was too long. That to me is not art. It was unpatriotic, and I was very disturbed, but I continue to hear issues with KU, and I've had children that have gone there and have received things along the unpatriotic expressions and the way they feel towards America and towards our veterans and towards the military, that when I saw it, I wasn't completely surprised, but it still was very, very offensive, and they need to do something so that they don't continue to have such a thing occur again.
Okay, Mr. Carlskent?
I was pleased that the flag was removed. I'm glad the chancellor chose to do that, and I appreciate what the governor did as well. I was offended when I saw the way the flag was depicted. Being a veteran, it hurt, and it bothered me. I think that it has received a great deal of publicity, but it took place right here in town, and so we're going to be exposed to it. But I was bothered by it, and I'm pleased that it was taken down.
Okay. The next question, I think we will go next to Mr. Neely. It is a 60-second answer. The Kansas legislature passed Senate Bill 405, which relaxed environmental standards in order to promote expansion of corporate agriculture and poultry production. Would you support an amendment to allow counties to have local control over the location of these facilities? Why or why not?
That's one that him and I are not going to be very pleased about. Both myself and my opponent here fought to keep Tyson out of Tonganoxie. My wife was on the legal board to fight against Tyson, and we felt like it was not the right fit for Tonganoxie. When it came to the agricultural part of the situation, that's not what we were looking at. We were looking at a company that was probably going to come in and take over our community and change it in ways that we were not happy with. So I would not support anything along the lines of the Kafkas and the large industrial agricultural things that they're trying to pass, unless it was the ability to turn around and stop, that. Anyway.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Carlskent?
Well, 405 expanded the number of chickens a broiler house could be in a location from around 100,000 to 330,000. I attempted to amend 405 in Agriculture Committee, and I attempted to do it on the floor of the House of Representatives. The leadership wanted 405 to pass, and they wanted a clean bill, and my amendments failed. You know, returning, I would still try to amend it to give the locals the option to decide on if they want this type of facility in their area or not. So 405 was as Mr. Neely indicated, it was quite a very controversial thing for the 42nd district.
Yes, let's go to the 45th district and Mr. Thacker.
Well, this is an example where I would have really appreciated having the questions in advance, because I'm not familiar with this bill at all, other than what these two gentlemen just spoke with. In general, I am against bigger government. I am for more local and smaller government control. However, the Tyson chicken thing was a whole nother matter. That was a corporate monster coming in kind of underhandedly, trying to backdoor its way through local governments that by their very nature are very few people go to county commission meetings, which I think is where a lot of these decisions made. And I apologize, I'm speaking a little bit out of ignorance because I'm not intimately familiar with the details of Tyson chicken. I just know that they weren't above board in the light of day with what they did. And you know, if this bill makes it harder for companies to do that, then I would be in support of it. But again, I'm not familiar at all with the details of this bill. The waters of the U.S. would be an example of government regulation that went incredibly too far. In my opinion, they were trying to seize control of every piece of land that has a drop of rainfall on it. And I support private land ownership. It's one of the foundations of this country, private ownership in general. And so if this bill promotes that, then I might be supportive. But again, I'm not familiar with the bill, so I guess I don't have an opinion.
Okay, Ms. Smith.
I don't know much about this bill, but it sounds like the legislature took steps to restrain themselves and government restraint is something that I favor. If this gave opportunities for communities to either go one direction or the other, or I would say if an amendment to that bill would allow local communities to go one direction or the other, it sounds like a good amendment to the bill.
Okay. We're getting some questions from the audience here, and we'll go first with this question to Mr. Neely. Would you sign a pledge to not increase taxes? 60-second answer.
I think she was actually looking at you, Ron.
Was that a
Yeah.
question for me?
Oh, I'm sorry. I did say wrong. Mr. Thacker, I'm sorry.
Well, I am
Thank you.
in general unhappy with the taxes in Kansas. The taxes are too high. I'm encouraged by the steps recently the federal government's taken. One tax increase that's going to slap us all in the face here when we file at the beginning of next year is we no longer will be able to, how you file on your federal taxes is how you have to file your Kansas income taxes. Most people now, I think somewhere 85–90% of people will file the standard deduction now, which is $24,000 on the federal return. The Kansas return, I believe, is still $7,500. So people that were previously filing itemized deductions on their federal returns are going to see a very big tax increase on their Kansas taxes this year around. I'm unhappy with the taxes, and I would like to see them go down. So I guess, in essence, yes, I would sign that tax pledge because I don't like the way the taxes are. Certainly don't want to see them go up.
Okay, Ms. Smith.
I certainly don't want any tax increases to happen. I'm hesitant to sign a pledge because the word tax is really a broad term, and if there's some kind of an excise fee that makes sense for the people that would benefit from the service, you know, that might be something that I could support. So it's really difficult for me to say I would absolutely pledge not to raise a tax, but I certainly plan to go to Topeka and have no intention of raising any taxes.
Okay. Now, Mr. Neely.
I have signed the tax pledge, and it is on its way there. We signed it here not too long ago. But the tax increases that we've had over the last couple of years have been astronomical, and the large one that we discussed earlier that was $1.2 billion was the one that I think probably got me more involved or made me think more about running. And the reason being is that once we did the $1.2 billion tax increase, we went ahead and we spent $1.1 billion. Therefore, we spent everything that we taxed everybody from. So that tells me that there will be more tax increases and that they're considering them right now.
Okay, Mr. Carlskin?
I'm not in favor of raising taxes. In 2017, as was said earlier in this forum, I mentioned it, we were looking at $1 billion in the whole of the state of Kansas. We've had downgrades in our credit rating, and so we had to have a reset of our taxes. Yes, it was an increase, but it's still below what it was in 2012. The 2015 legislature increased the sales tax because they didn't want to deal with the brownback tax experiment in doing what needed to be done. We have, and because of what happened with the state, the local governments have been overtaxing with respect to property tax. Property taxes need to be dealt with. So to answer your question, would I sign a pledge? I'm hesitant to sign a pledge because there's too many factors that are playing, could play into this. We need to reduce the taxes, but we need to look at it. Taxes should be looked at, it's a three-legged stool, and we need to have a balance of the taxes.
Okay. We'll come back to you with the first answer on this question. We have a submitted question that would like to follow up on the flag issue, and that is a 60-second answer. How do you feel about Chris Kobach campaigning in a Jeep painted like an American flag?
I'm not opposed to Chris Kobach riding in a Jeep that has red, white, and blue. There's other vehicles that have red, white, and blue on them. I'm not opposed to that. The 50 caliber machine gun, it certainly created a lot of controversy, in that vehicle. But as far as something that's red, white, and blue, I'm not going to get caught up in that. There's other things that I have more of an issue with.
Okay, Mr. Neely.
I'm not offended by him riding in a red, white, and blue Jeep. He was trying to show patriotism, and I think that there needs to be a lot more patriotism in the world today. So I was not offended by it at all.
Okay, Mr. Thacker.
I think this question dovetails perfectly with my answer earlier. Secretary Kobach's Jeep is not a flag. It's not up on a flagpole in front of a public building. It's a Jeep, and it's painted in the same colors and symbols to resemble a flag. That Jeep is much more closely resembles art than an actual U.S. flag that was taken and painted and raised on a flagpole in front of a public building. And as far as Ma Deuce, I think it's great that he has a mock-up, it's a fake gun, on top of his Jeep, because as a combat veteran, I was really glad to see Ma Deuce on many occasions. And I think it's a good reminder for the people that never serve in combat, never serve in the military, that the military is a dangerous business and people get killed. And a machine gun just like that one saved many, many, many American lives.
And Ms. Smith.
I'm sympathetic to the point that Mr. Thacker makes about the gun, but the fact is this was a parade with children, and my understanding from the reports is it scared some of the children. There was a man standing up on a truck with a gun, pointed at the crowd. I think that he went too far, and I think I was especially disappointed with his reaction, thinking it was kind of funny, and that obviously he went for the shock factor and was glad to have the publicity. Any publicity is good publicity as far as he was concerned. So I was really disappointed that he made the decision to do it in the first place, and especially disappointed that he chose to do it again, even knowing what reaction it got from the children in the parade. As far as the red, white, and blue Jeep, I mean, I have a scarf that has, stars and stripes on it. I don't think anybody would be offended if I had this scarf. I thought it was pretty patriotic when I got it, but it really did bother me that he does that just for the shock factor of it.
Okay. I will come back to you for the first answer on this question. It's a 60-second answer. Do you believe current state campaign finance laws are sufficient? If not, what changes would you make?
I don't think I'd make any changes. I think they seem to be sufficient. We have a lot of rules we have to follow. I mean, my treasurer will tell you that she's a stickler for that. I'm grateful to have Janice Bunker as my treasurer because she's making sure that every T is crossed and every I is dotted, and it's not really that complicated, but you certainly know where my contributions are going to be coming from and what I'm spending them on. I mean, what more could anybody want from campaign finance law?
Okay, Mr. Thacker?
Well, the campaign finance laws aren't terribly complicated, but I'm glad I have a degree in accounting because my wife and I are our own treasurer. We don't hire out. And you have to track every donation. If somebody gives you cash, the most you can take in a primary is $1,000 cash. That didn't pay for my yard signs. So, and if you think that my integrity or my vote as a legislature is for sale for $1,000, you don't know me. And I think some of the limits need to be raised. I'm all fine with large donations, but if a person gives me $150, I don't think the state of Kansas needs to know their name, address, and occupation. Especially the occupation. What government interest is served by knowing the occupation of my donor? Now, if somebody was giving me $1,000 or $5,000 or $10,000, and especially if that somebody is an organization or a corporation, absolutely. But if my next door neighbor gives me $150, I don't think you need to know that he's a retired carman on the Santa Fe Railroad.
Okay, and to the 42nd District, Mr. Neely.
I don't think we need to change anything on it right at the moment, but there are things that are complicated in it. Being somebody that has just started running, this is the first time, it is complicated in that there's not a lot of places to ask questions. And sometimes it's very difficult to get the answers that you're looking for in a timely manner. I would like to see something done along those lines that would assist candidates, that would help them in their quest as they're running. So.
Okay, and Mr. Carlskent?
I don't feel like that the campaign laws are restrictive, as been mentioned by others. They're very prescriptive, and you'll know when we publish, there's different deadlines we have to publish, who gave us money and where our money went. I guess my biggest concern, frustration, is over groups like AFP, who claim to be Americans for Posterity. They pour in hundreds of thousands of dollars to go after people like me. Last fall they sent out 6 postcards on me, and they've already sent out one here in the last couple of days. And they don't have to account for their money, and they just hide by it to try to get people out of office like myself. So that's my biggest frustration, is the PACs and the way they can spend money, and unfairly.
Okay. This question will go first to Mr. Neely. 60-second answer. If federal laws change, would you support a state ban on same-sex marriage?
Yes, I do not support same-sex marriage, so therefore if it's banned, then yeah, I would support it.
Okay, and Mr. Carlskent?
I would as well.
Okay. Quick answers. Mr. Thacker?
Well, this is an issue that touches the foundation of our society. First of all, no law should be passed that regulates who you love or who you live with or what 2 consenting adults do in the privacy of their own home. That being said, we've talked about the adoption, we've talked about the foster kids, we've talked about the drug problems, and the foundation of our moral society is a man and a woman raising children together. And I would absolutely favor a law that bans same-sex marriage in the state of Kansas.
I would absolutely oppose a law that bans same-sex marriage. I know wonderful people with wonderful families in same-sex marriage families.
Okay. We're going to take one more question, and then we'll kind of wrap up at that point. This one will go first to Mr. Thacker. Do you support implementing an internet sales tax in Kansas? Why or why not? 60 seconds.
Well, the internet sales tax is a tricky proposition. Where does the sale occur? Where the person receives the goods, where the person orders the goods, Where's the financial transaction occur? Most of us, when we use our online banking, our banks aren't even in the state of Kansas. So there's a lot of moving parts there. In general, I'm against the internet sales tax because it's another tax, and I am taxed enough already. I guess I'll just leave it there.
Okay, Ms. Smith?
I think I'm for internet sales tax because it's really harming our local businesses, and I want our local businesses to succeed. There's no reason why we shouldn't be paying the same kind of tax on an item when we order it through the internet as we order it at home. I mean, I think this tax dollars should stay in the state, and I think that's what the proposals are generally designed to do. So I don't have any problem with internet sales tax. It's very, very complicated to enforce and to implement, and I know the state's been working on that for probably 10 years or more, trying to figure out how to make that work. But I think it supports our local business to have a level playing field.
Okay. Mr. Neely?
I wouldn't support it. It's a tax, and I will not support a tax. I realize that, there's, like Mr. Thacker said, there's so many different ways as to where the tax is actually coming from. I think it'll be very difficult to turn around and enforce such a thing. I also think that we have an enormous group of internet businesses now with Amazon and those type of businesses that are within the state of Kansas, that if we start imposing taxes that could affect our business relationship with such large businesses as Amazon has brought in.
Okay, and Mr. Carlskent?
It is a complicated issue, but I would support it. I think that for the state of Kansas and local governments are losing large amounts of money. I know the tax committee in the House has looked at it, and it can be a very complicated process, as I said, but I think it needs to be given serious consideration.
Okay, thank you. By way of wrapping up today, we'd like to give each of you 90 seconds to talk about any issues that you think that we didn't cover today, that you think that we should have addressed, and if we can start with Mr. Carlskent, that would be great.
Well, we've been going almost an hour and a half now, and frankly, I can't think of any questions that you didn't ask that I wasn't anticipating. I would just close by saying that I feel like that the state of Kansas is going in the right direction, and I hope to return to Topeka to continue the right direction. I don't want to see what happened in 2012 and on down that path that took the state in the wrong direction. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Neely?
We've covered a lot today. I think that there's always going to be more that we could cover, and there'll probably be more issues as the weeks go on here. I would like to thank you guys for putting this on. I'd like to thank the candidates for that. I'd like to reiterate that if anybody has any questions or anything that they would like to speak about, I have a website, and I also have a Facebook page that you can get a hold of me, and I'd be happy to speak with you if there are any questions or concerns or other issues that you wish to speak about.
Okay, Mr. Thacker?
I'd like to thank the Voter Education Coalition, and I'd like to thank all the citizens that are watching and took the time to come out here. Our process works best when everyone's involved. And going back to the campaign finance, this is a perfect example. I could not afford to televise an ad. I can't afford radio ads. I can barely afford yard signs. I'm not taking money from large corporations. I'm just a guy who's unhappy with his current government, and so he ran. And this gives me an opportunity for people to look at me, and I applaud all the people up here because, like I said, this process works best when we all participate. And I think you have we've differentiated on some issues. I think you have some choices to make. And I'd also like everyone to remember that July 17th is a voter registration deadline. Please, whoever you're going to pick, get out there, register, educate yourself on the issues, and vote.
And Ms. Smith?
I'm torn about which issue to talk about last, but the one I think I want to talk about, as I said, my husband's a teacher, and we touched on the school funding a little bit, but I've talked to a lot of teachers. Talked to a lot of parents going door to door. I've talked to a lot of teachers who are parents, and I really get an earful. And one thing I keep hearing over and over in all this school funding, whether it's at the state level or whether it's at the school board level deciding what they're going to spend money on, they don't ask the teachers. I mean, ask the teachers what to do about gun violence in the schools. Ask the teachers where the money needs to go. Don't just hand them IT that they don't even think that they want when they know that thousands of dollars could have been spent on something else in the classroom. There's a lot of what they see. They don't experience the school funding, whether it's a little bit of a decrease or a little bit of an increase. They don't experience that. What they do see is a lot of bad decisions at the local level, and I don't know what the state can do about that, but I think it's really important as much as we can. The voters want transparency, they want accountability, and the teachers really want to have a say in what they experience in the classroom to have some impact on these issues. So again, thank you also for holding this forum. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about these issues with everyone and for us to see it online and to be able to point people to your video so they can see more about the candidates, and I'm really delighted to be here.
Okay. Thanks for joining the Voter Education Coalition for our primary forum. As you noted, this forum will be available on the city's YouTube channel if you'd like to refer people to that later on. Special thanks to the City of Lawrence and all the candidates for both running and for joining us today. We wanted to remind everybody that the primary election is August the 7th. Advance voting in the election starts this Wednesday, July 17th. Thanks for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you.
Y'all ready?
Yeah, do we
Okay.
ever need to push these buttons here?
No, he'll turn the mics on over
do?
there.
Okay.
Your light should be on.
Oh, okay.
When-
Everything's smartened up over time, yeah.
That's good.
Okay, I think we're ready to get started. If people in the audience would take a seat and can you guys go ahead and sit down? We're ready to get going. Okay, thank you. Okay, welcome to the Voter Education Coalition Primary Forum. The Voter Education Coalition is a nonpartisan organization that sponsors candidate forums, meet and greets, and other events to educate citizens about candidates and their policies. You can learn more about VEC events by visiting their Facebook page at facebook.com/VECDGKS. This forum is being televised live on Midco Channel 25 and is streaming live at lawrenceks.org/stream. It will also be available later anytime on the city's YouTube channel. We'd like to thank the City of Lawrence and their staff for the use of the City Commission meeting room and all their help in making this event possible. And we'd like to thank the Douglas County Clerk's Office for the district maps that are on display in the lobby, and I think that we'll have some of those on the screen for you as well. I'm Ann Gardner. I'm going to be your moderator today. The rules of this forum are pretty simple. I will be asking questions submitted by the VEC partners and audience members. Each question will have a designated response time. At the end of this period, you'll hear a bell, we'll move to the next candidate or question. We will rotate the order of responses between each candidate, and there will be no rebuttals and no questions between candidates. We're going to have opening statements in just a minute, but I want to get our panel introduced here. This is the forum for the Democratic candidates for two House districts that are Kansas House districts that are being contested in the upcoming primary. We have three candidates for the 45th district, which wraps around the far northwest part of Lawrence and extends northwest into the county, including Lecompton. If the map is up there, this is the district that's in yellow. And the candidates in that district are Mike Amix, Stephen X. Davis, and Aidan Loveland Coster. Also in this district, in this grouping, we have Boog Heiberger, who is a candidate in the 46th district. He has an opponent in that district, Ben Furlow, who was unable to attend today. This district covers Lawrence, roughly east of Iowa Street, between the Kansas Turnpike and 19th Street, and extending east into the county. There are no Republican candidates filed in this race, so the primary will decide the winner of the race, barring a challenge from an independent or a write-in candidate, and we just want voters to be aware of that situation. So we'll kind of try to rotate. We want our three candidates for the 45th district to be answering questions to back so that the voters in that district can compare, but we'll be kind of rotating through those three candidates and then also giving Mr. Heiberger a chance to respond. We'll start with our opening statements, 2-minute opening statements. Boog, since you're on the left, we'll let you go first.
And how appropriate. Dennis
On
Boog,
my left. Sorry.
I'm Dennis Boog Heiberger. I am a state representative for the 46th district. And explain what the boundaries were. I've been in this position for 4 years. It's the seat that was previously held by Paul Davis. And one thing I want to be clear about is just because I'm the incumbent, I don't think that gives me any particular right to the job. I don't have squatter's rights. I think it's a position that needs to be earned. And in determining whether I've earned that position, I don't think things I did 20 years ago matter, 10 years ago matter, even what I've done 2 to 4 years ago. I think what's really important in determining that is what I've done for you for the last 2 years and what I can do for you for the next 2 years. I think it's always, what have you done for me lately is always an appropriate question to ask an elected official. But I like that question because I think I can give you a pretty good answer. And I hope to talk to you more today about what I've done for you for the last 2 and 4 years and what I hope to do for the next 2 years. Part of my background, I was going to describe the district boundaries, but Ann did that, so I got a little more time now. I'm an attorney. I'm self-employed. I work, do general civil law. I've been on the city commission for 6 years. I've spent about 300 Tuesday nights in these seats up here, so it's kind of nice to be back again. See some familiar faces too. So I was mayor for a year. So I really do think I have the skills and experience to do a good job for you in Topeka, and I really do look forward to talking to you about some of the things I want to do next year.
Okay, thanks. Then we'll move to our three candidates from the 45th District. Mike Amix, please.
And thank you very much. I want to thank the Voter Education Coalition for having the forum this evening. It's a great opportunity for all of us to be able to share the ideas that we have. And I really appreciate the fact that we do have the voter education today, as I was explaining to my two friends here. In the old days, we would have forums, and we would have, every group would have a forum. So today, having the coalition works very well. I am a lifelong resident of Douglas County, Kansas, something I'm extremely proud of. I grew up part of my life in town and part of it in the country. A lot of people don't realize that I went to Wakarusa Valley School for grade school, so I have a lot of good friends in the rural part of the county and also in town because I graduated from Lawrence High School in 1971. I did marry my high school sweetheart, and my wife Marilyn is a doll and somebody I'm very proud to have all the years that we've had the time to spend together. I want to thank everyone who came this evening and those who are watching on TV this evening. You know, one of the things that I do want to say is that I've had the opportunity, like Book said a second ago, where I've spent a number of days probably in this chair right here, even though that I do think that they probably changed it since I left, but it's something that I'm very proud of, and I do think that the time that I spent here and also at the Douglas County Commission has given me the opportunity with experience to be able to take that to Topeka. It's something that is important to me to be able to share the work that's been done locally. Obviously, I'm somebody who is a big home rule person, and something that I plan to explain further this evening. I do want to say one thing. I would appreciate your vote in the 45th District. If you're a Democrat who's listening or an independent who's listening, I will try to get to see as many of you as I can or have correspondence with you. If you do have questions, never hesitate to contact me. One of the things that I've always prided myself on is my accessibility, and I plan to always be able to answer.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Davis.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen X. Davis. I'm a candidate for the 45th District of the Kansas House of Representatives. I too want to thank the Voter Education Coalition for putting this on. I think it's a great public service, and it's a pleasure to be here. I have lived in Kansas my whole life. I first moved to Douglas County in 2013. Since I've lived here, I've tried to be as active as possible in local politics and state politics. That does include the Democratic Party. I founded the Douglas County Young Democrats in 2017, and since then I've worked with the Kansas Young Democrats and the Young Democrats of America at their latest national convention. In 2017, I worked as an office assistant at the Kansas legislature and for three state representatives, and I learned a lot about the process by which bills are introduced and debated and passed, and it's very interesting to kind of learn from within, and I believe it will give me a running start when I am elected. We hear every day about how important the 2018 election is on a federal level, but I'm here to remind you that it's just as important on a state level as well. In the 2019 legislative session, the State House is going to have to ensure that our schools are constitutionally funded, that our budget is structurally balanced, that taxes are not so regressive that they punish working families, and that the voting rights of every citizen are protected. If the Democrats pick up 2 seats, we will crack the Republican supermajority in the State House. This district would bring us halfway there. The important thing for the Democratic Party in the general election is to put forward the candidate that has the best chance to win. I have most closely followed state issues. I have watched legislation be enacted, and I know exactly how it works. I believe that I have the best chance to win, and I believe that I should earn your vote and the Democratic nomination for this office. If you want to learn more about me, you can check out my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/DavisForKansas, or my website, which is stephenxdavisforkansas.com. Thank you.
Okay, and Ms. Koster.
Thank you so much for having me as part of this voter forum this afternoon. I'm really excited to be here. I'm Aiden Levelin Koster. I'm a Lawrence native, and both of my childhood homes are in the 45th District. We bought our forever home in the 45th 5.5 years ago, and I don't want to just run for any office. I want to represent the 45th, which is my home. I've lived here 28 of my 38 years. I'm the mother of 2 fantastic daughters. My husband is a pediatrician, and I am a working professional. Here's what I want to do for the 45th. We have to expand Medicaid. We are leaving family and friends behind. We have to sufficiently and equitably fund the public schools and higher education. We got confirmation of that this spring, just a couple weeks ago, from the Kansas Supreme Court. There's no other thing to do other than continue to expand public school funding. We have to bring our infrastructure into the future, both our highways and our rural broadband. I live in a home that has had internet fast enough to stream Netflix since March of this year. We have to repair DCF. We have 2 layers of critical problems in our foster care system, and we are putting children in immediate and continued danger. We must enact responsible gun legislation. We have to reduce the food sales tax. We are leaving working families behind, and everyone has to eat. Based on my education and my experience, I am the most qualified candidate in our primary for this position, and I would ask for your vote. I have current health policy on the books in the state of Kansas, and I have been an active part of writing and passing legislation in Kansas, so I know how it works, and I have lots and lots of other experience that also makes me well qualified, and I would appreciate your consideration. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Before we get into questions, I would like to remind the people who are here in the City Commission chambers with us that if they'd like to submit a question, that we have VEC members that have some cards back there that you can use to write down your question, and they'll forward those to me. And also, if you're watching at home, you can submit a question through the VEC Facebook page, so you can do that any time during the forum. Okay, let's start with our questions. I think that we'll go ahead and start with Mike Amix on this first one. A 2-minute answer. When did you file to run and why?
I filed on the morning of June 1st, I had, I guess, decided a long time ago that I really wanted to be a state representative. I just tried to look at when the best timing was going to be. I want everybody to know I did consider at one time the possibility of maybe running for the county commission again, but realizing that there was some very good people that had signed up, and so I decided the state is where I really wanted to be, and I wanted to do that quite a while ago. Being a state representative is something that like I say, I've wanted to do for a long time because of the things that I've been able to learn while sitting in this building in the county, and I would really like to take that experience to Topeka. I think some of the times the thing that happens is so many times is Topeka, the legislature passes a number of things and they send a mandate down to City Hall or to the county commission, and there may not be any financing available or anything like that. And so one of the things that happens is I'm a big believer that a lot of things that happen in legislation that is passed would be better off if it came from, the local decision makers. And that makes all the sense in the world. They can decide, the financial end of it without having to get a mandate that is got no funding. So something that I believe that I can help with, and something that I plan to take my experience at Topeka to be able to help carry that out.
Okay, I'm not sure I said that this was, we were going to give you 2 minutes for this answer, but just in case. And we'll go next to Mr. Davis.
Sure. I filed in January. I have, I've run for the State House before. It was something that I had not, given up on. I definitely feel like I have a lot to offer at the state level. In the meantime, I've done as much as I can as an ordinary citizen. I lobbied the city to waive bus fares on election days. I have served on the past 2 years on the Social Service Funding Advisory Board for the city, and I've been working to try and investigate missing voter registrations at the state level. So it's something where, I always do as much as I can as an ordinary citizen, but I do feel like there's a lot more that I could do as a state representative. And as part of that, I have been, working just to learn as much as I can about the process and then try to show people and listen to people about what issues matter most to me and what matters most to them. And what I always tell people is, any issue that's important to you is important to me, and I'm eager to hear what they have to say so that I can use my abilities at the state level to get those policies enacted.
Okay, Ms. Coster.
I filed for the 45th in the fall of 2017. I filed to run because I have 2 children, 2 school-age daughters. I've been involved in CASA for the last 10 years, both as a program director and currently as a member of the Douglas County CASA Board. And the kids in our state are in danger. We are not funding our public schools. We are not protecting the children that are in the state's custody. We're also not doing a very good job of investigating children who may be in critical danger. We have a need to fund public education in this state. That's something that the Republican-controlled legislature, governor's office, Senate has fallen behind on, especially over the last 12 years, but really in the last 6 years it's been dramatic. We have higher education in this state that needs to be fully funded. If we expect our state to be able to produce the next teachers and police officers, physicians, emergency personnel, journalists, we have to be able to educate them in order to do those jobs. I feel like our state is at a turning point, and if we don't bring a little bit of change into the State House, we will continue to go in a direction that is not as positive as it needs to be, and I would like to be part of that change. Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Heiberger.
I filed on or about April 9th. I don't remember the exact day. I know it was during the veto session, as we were back and our regular committees weren't working, so I was already at the Capitol and had some free time, so I went over to Memorial Hall. Why am I filing again? I mean, because the job that I ran to do in 2014 isn't finished yet. We've made some progress, but we've got a lot more way to go. People ask me if I enjoy it, and I tell them no, not really. Enjoy isn't the right word, but I'm really glad I'm there because I feel like I can help make a difference in moving the state forward. And I am really hopeful that after November, I'm gonna have a lot more new friends in Topeka, including one of these people to my left, and a new governor, and we will really be able to start fixing some of the damage that's been done in the state and move forward, and that will be exciting. That's what's really motivating me to go back this time, be a part of really making some positive change in the state.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, we'll start with Mr. Davis on this one. It's a 90-second answer. Which committees do you want to serve on in the legislature or feel most qualified to serve on?
One sort of dry committee that I'm qualified to serve on is the Rules and Journal. I'm a parliamentarian, I'm a member of 2 organizations, and I'm the Rules Chair for the Douglas County, or rather for the Kansas Young Democrats. So it's something where I feel like I can do a lot of good, and it's also something where people have been focusing on issues where right now in the State House you can introduce a bill anonymously. Most of the bills that are passed are like that. Bills are kind of combined together and so forth. And so I think that's something where there's building frustration about the lack of transparency, and it's something where I can use my experience to really make a difference. Issues that are important to Lawrence, certainly local government, one that I feel qualified to do as well as elections. That's something where, as sort of a very politically minded person, I know we've had a lot of issues with that. I know that especially under, Secretary of State Chris Kobach, we've had kind of a disappointing record on voting rights, and I think that's something where the more good Democrats we can put in that committee, the better. And I guess also federal and state affairs would be something that interests me, just because I really am fascinated by constitutional law and by those sort of fundamental principles that affect the state and the federal government, and they really deal a lot with those kind of bedrock issues, as well as what are known as the sin issues, which I think sometimes Lawrence is a little bit interested in. So,
Okay, Ms. Coster.
I think the 2 committees that I'm the most interested in participating on are the Health and Human Services Committee and the Children and Seniors Committee. I actually began my career in public health. Boog and I worked together at KDHE. I'm not going to say how many years ago that was. Might give a little bit away about my age. I guess I already said I was 38. So my original background is in public health. I was raised in a health household. I'm currently married to a physician, and I have worked in the not only the public health field, but also in health education. And it's been a focus of mine for a long time. And the Children and Seniors Committee, I've done lots of work with CASA across the state, including here in Douglas County. But additionally, I actually worked for the Kansas Department on Aging, which is now Kansas Department on Aging and Disability Services, when I was a Kansas Governor's Fellow. And I have a fairly special place in my heart for that agency, and I believe I would be well prepared to participate on that committee as well.
Okay, let's go back to our other candidate in the 45th District, Mr. Amix.
And quite honestly, local government would be something that would be very high on my list. During my time, spent between the two bodies that I served on locally, about 24 years, 23 years. And I know that there's going to be a lot of issues that come down that are going to affect cities and counties over the next several years, and it's something that I really have an interest in. Another one would probably be commerce, labor, and economic development. I spent a lot of time in economic development issues as they came before the city. I would love to be able to work on projects as they come along, and also policy as it comes, through the committee. So those are two that would be at the top of my list. I suppose another one that I would really have an interest in might be energy and utilities and telecommunications. As was said earlier, I have an interest in expanding broadband in rural parts of the county. I have a son that works in the business of internet, and he lives in Pratt, and it's something that I know he and I talk about quite a bit, and I know as I hear from people in the 45th District, there's a lot of areas that are just not being covered with adequate broadband. So, that would be another committee that I would definitely have an interest in.
Okay, and then Mr. Heiberger.
I currently serve on the Federal and State Affairs Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and the Corrections and Juvenile Justice Committee. And I think the reason I was appointed to all those committees is because of my background as a practicing attorney. A lot of people think the State House is full of lawyers, but there are only 14 practicing attorneys in the House right now out of 125, none in the Senate. And there are only 5 attorneys in the Democratic delegation in the House. So that's why I'm there. Stephen's going to have to arm wrestle me for the Rules Committee. I've been holding out for a slot there. And I want to talk about a project I've initiated this summer. I've got together a majority almost of the Democratic caucus to talk about a package of rules changes for next year. Rules aren't very sexy, but rules, our rules need to be much more transparent, and they need to be changed in a way that make them more democratic. And I think we've got made good progress on a package of rules changes to offer that will help make the process much better, including no more anonymous bills, reducing power of committee chairs, and things like that. So that's a project I'm really excited about. I mean, there are a half a dozen other committees that I think I have the skills and background to be part of. I really miss being on the Energy Committee where I was the first 2 years. I'm a Kansas Public Health Leadership Institute graduate, worked for KDHE for 20 years, so Health Committee would be appropriate. I was the president of a farm machinery dealership for 20 years, which most people don't know. So I was really interested in the Ag Committee, but didn't get it. So.
Okay, thank you. Next question, we'll start with Ms. Koster on this. Senate Bill 284, the Adoption Protection Act, which was signed into law recently, allows allocation of state adoption funds to agencies that have, quote, sincerely held religious beliefs that would exclude same-sex couples. Do you believe this is a discriminatory use of state tax dollars? Why or why not? And it's a 90-second answer.
I believe it is a discriminatory use of state tax dollars. And so marriage equality is the law of the land, as of Obergefell a couple years ago at the Supreme Court. And unfortunately, in the state of Kansas, we have not necessarily always been supportive of using or allowing, giving people protection based on sexuality in hiring and firing and other areas in our society. And the adoption of kids out of the state's care is the most recent explosion of that kind of discrimination. We have thousands of children in the state of Kansas who are eligible for adoption because their original parents' parental rights have been severed by the state. And we don't have enough families to adopt those children. And so by allowing agencies that process adoptions for the state to discriminate gay families, single families, divorced prospective parents because of religious beliefs, not only are we discriminating against those individuals who want to adopt, but we are continuing the cycle of leaving children in the state's care without permanent living homes. And in my 10 years involved in CASA, the one thing I can tell you is that children need love and they need homes.
Okay, same question to Mr. Amix.
You know, one of the things that's happened during my time in public office is I've probably had a great attitude change on a number of things, but a lot of the policies that deal with same-sex issues really comes into play. I definitely believe that law is discriminatory, and I do believe that with the number of people that we have in this state that would love to adopt children, we have some great folks in this state that should be allowed to adopt children. I do think one of the things that we do have and things that we need to take into consideration here, and you know, I don't understand the law perfectly. I want everybody to know that, but I do know when something's wrong, and this appears to be wrong. That if an organization who receives any type of help from the state is allowed to use their personal belief, I just think that that's wrong and it is discriminatory. We need we need homes for kids.
Okay, and Mr. Davis.
You know, I think that was kind of an interesting piece of legislation, to say the least. My feeling is, first of all, you know, I absolutely agree that gay marriage is the law of the land, and we need to, you know, respect the fact that same-sex couples, you know, have the right to have children. And I also understand there are people, you know, that have their own religious beliefs. But as soon as state funding is involved, we need to be focusing more on accomplishing the goals that money is there for. So the taxpayers, you know, give us this money. We want to make sure that children are adopted to loving homes. Our goal as the state should be to achieve that objective. We should not be handing that money over to another organization to decide based on its own, you know, criteria, on its own beliefs, with no accountability to the public, how that money should be used. So in my mind, you know, I think that's just a non-starter. I think that if we are going to be giving state contracts and funding to agencies, our primary goal should be placing children in loving homes. And, you know, I think the rest is just a distraction.
Okay, and Mr. Heiberger.
We heard 2 days of testimony on this bill at the Fed and State Committee, and the reasons offered for the bill were that faith-based agencies might be forced to leave the state without the bill, and that without the bill it would be much harder to place special needs children. And after hearing the testimony, I don't think either of those things are true. We heard from an adoption judge in Wyandotte County who said she does 100 adoptions a year and had never had a special needs child placed by a faith-based agency. We also had a woman, part of a gay couple, who came with her 7 special needs adopted kids and testified, and you could tell that they were a great, loving family. And you know, it is conceivable that at some point in the future, a faith-based adoption agency may have to choose between working with gay couples or not serving the people they're serving. I mean, right now, all these agencies are free to place kids based on the preferences of the parents, and there's nothing interfering with that right now. The only thing that would change is if they start to accept public money, and I don't think public money should be used to support discrimination, and that's what would happen. Equality Kansas was working with the proponents of the bill up until the last minute to find a compromise that everybody could accept. I mean, I would have supported Equality Kansas' proposal, which would have removed Section D from the bill, which is the section involving state payments to such organizations. They didn't accept it, and I voted against it.
Okay, we're going to come back to you for the first answer on this next question. It's a short one. It's a 90-second answer. Do you support Medicaid expansion in Kansas? Why or why not?
Absolutely. Something I've been working on for the last 4 years. We've come close a couple times. If it wasn't for a governor's veto, it would be law in Kansas by now. I think it's unconscionable in a state, in the United States of America, that there's so many people who don't have access to health insurance. I think the notion that it's a handout to undeserving people is just a lie. I think majority of people who are eligible for Medicaid expansion are working people. And the costs for caring for those people are still getting absorbed by the system anyway. I mean, we're not saving ourselves money by not expanding Medicaid. And I think there are studies that show that Medicaid expansion could be revenue neutral for the state general fund. I'm not sure I buy all of that, but even if the higher credible estimates for the cost for the state under the current funding system are true, I mean, the expansion is projected to create 6,000 jobs in the state. Even at the high estimate, this would be the biggest and most cost-effective economic development program in state history. So for those reasons, I think it's a no-brainer, and I am pretty confident we'll make it happen last year unless changes happen on the federal level that make it not possible.
Okay, and Mr. Amix.
I'm absolutely supportive of the expansion. One of the reasons is that I have the great opportunity to serve on the Lawrence Memorial Hospital Board of Trustees. I see the work that we do as a community hospital, and I realize that just from things that I see and I pick up on, there are a number of people that don't have the opportunity to have health care, in our county. And I think that that's one of the things that I see right now as being one of the top things that we need to be working on. Without that expansion, there is no way a lot of people are going to have, the health care service that they need. I quite honestly, I wouldn't have to think a whole lot about this. I think it's something that absolutely has to happen. I would be interested to learn the costs of, Boog brought up about administering the program, but it can't be as high as some of the care that folks are having to receive from things like LMH and other places that could be taken care of if they had that opportunity to be able to have access to health care.
Okay, Mr. Davis.
Yes, I absolutely support Medicaid expansion in Kansas. We live in a state where if you make minimum wage, you're considered too rich to be on Medicaid. I think that's that's shameful. I'm not concerned about the cost. I think I agree with Boog that bringing that additional money into Kansas which is frankly our taxpayer money that we've paid to the federal government, bringing it back into Kansas to pay our doctors and nurses and ensure that our citizens have health care. I'm not at all concerned about spending money on those people. I also think with the Medicaid program, we need to strongly reevaluate and for most things, I believe, deprivatize the functions that are performed in the CanCare system. Right now, a great deal of it is done where we sort of write a blank check, and the companies do this with very little oversight. Governor Collier brags about saving money. Well, you can always save money if you have 3 kids by only feeding 2 of them. But the effectiveness of your program is determined by how well you're doing your job. And I don't believe that the Medicaid program in Kansas is doing its job right now. So in addition to expanding Medicaid, I think we need to take a close look at how CanCare is running and, whenever possible, restore public accountability to those programs.
And Ms. Koster.
I agree with everyone else at this table that Medicaid expansion, it's beyond time. As the wife of a pediatrician and the daughter of a late pediatrician, I've spent most of my life thinking about children's health, and regardless of how you feel about the Affordable Care Act, it was designed with Medicaid expansion in mind. And unfortunately, that's had to fall to each individual state, and as we all know, Kansas has not made it happen yet. When people are without affordable health care, it lands on children the hardest, unfortunately, because they're not in a position to support themselves. They're not in a position to make decisions about themselves. And if their parents can't get access to affordable health care, then neither can the children. We also have lots of young working professionals in this state who are employed, productive members of society and fall in that Medicaid expansion gap. I have a friend who was literally felled by a spinal tumor this spring, or I'm sorry, a year ago, that came up out of nowhere, and she became paralyzed from the knees down. She did not have health insurance coverage because she couldn't afford it as a self-employed business owner. It took 9 months for her to be approved for CanCare once she was no longer employed, and in that time, her tumor grew back larger, and her recovery has been lengthy. My husband also has come home and said, I spent 3 hours on the phone today trying to find a medication for a kid without insurance.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. This will go first to Mr. Amix. This is a long question about school finance, so it's a two-parter, but bear with me here. On June 25th, the state Supreme Court ruled that the legislature met its responsibility to equitably distribute school funding, but still requires the legislature to meet the adequacy requirement in Article 6 of the state constitution. This means the legislature will have to address this issue in the next session. 2 questions, and we'll have 2 minutes total for these. Do you agree with the Supreme Court decision, why or why not? And do you support a constitutional amendment that would limit the court's authority over school funding by declaring, quote, the power to establish adequacy of funding for education, adequacy of financing for education as exclusively within the legislative power of the state? Why or why not?
Okay, first question. I agree with the court's decision, and I think it is absolutely our responsibility to make sure that we meet the adequacy and equitable questions, that have been set forth. That is my top priority. I will work with anybody in the legislature to make sure that we take care of this issue. When I stop and look at education, one of the things that I realize is that every dollar that we spend on education, let's just talk about Lawrence and Douglas County, Perry LaCompton. I have a number of school districts that I represent, so being asked to represent in the 45th district. One of the things that I find is every dollar that's spent in a classroom ends up back in pretty much the same locale as where it came. And so you talk about an economic development engine. I look at schools as being something that you could take as an economic development tool. There's some great opportunities that what we have with our schools, and again, it should be our top priority to make sure that we take care of this issue, and just take care of it. I mean, people have seen this, going for the last several years. This doesn't need to be. Let's take care of the problem. The amendment, absolutely no. When we stop and look at checks and balances, I think it is so important that the court has, that we maintain the court as having, that ability to be able to render decision on whether or not we have taken our job, we've done it seriously, and we've met the adequate and equitable issues. So no, I would not support an amendment.
Okay, Mr. Davis.
So the first question is whether I agree with the Supreme Court. I absolutely agree that the funding bill is equitable. I think the legislature finally did its job on that front and ensured that the school funding formula is going to provide an equitable education for people regardless of where they live in the state of Kansas. With respect to adequacy, I understood the court's position. I felt like there probably were some good points on the other side that maybe were not adequately addressed. But I also appreciate their position. So, for me, the most critical thing for the legislature to do next year is address those problems that they still pointed out, particularly the lack of adjustment for inflation, to ensure that we're meeting those at a minimum. And by the way, nothing prevents us from doing better than what we're told to do. And that we enact a formula that adjusts itself so that hopefully in the future, when we continue to meet those obligations, there won't be a necessity for litigation. Of course, one solution would be a constitutional amendment. I absolutely oppose that. When the people adopted Article 6, they were clear that the legislature provides a suitable education for all public school students. I don't think they were ever unclear about that then. I don't think they've been unclear about it now. They know what they want their legislature to do. The problem is they haven't done it. The Supreme Court is only pointing out that these bills are not adequate, that the students are not meeting the goals that the legislature and the Board of Education have set out. That's not The problem is not that the referee is calling the shots. The problem is that the legislature has not done its job. So no, I absolutely oppose that amendment, and I think it's a distraction from the fact that particularly the Republican leadership in the State House has done a very, very poor job of handling the education issue.
Okay, Ms. Coster.
Okay, I agreed with the court's decision, not only in that the equitability has been dealt with in the funding formula, but that also it was not adequately funded, but also in their decision not to close schools for this year. That would have put thousands of public school teachers and administrators and children and families with children in a serious bind if there was no school for the kids starting, round about August 15th. It's our job as a state, and it's laid out in our Constitution, that we have to adequately educate our children, and if we close down the schools, we're not educating them. I agree. I think that the court would have used closing the schools as an ultimate last resort if the legislature had failed to pass something that was an improvement. But they did make some progress, and so I agree that the schools should stay open, and I'm glad that the Supreme Court also agreed with that. As for a constitutional amendment, no, I'm absolutely opposed to that. I'm actually an attorney by training, and we are lucky in the state of Kansas. Our kids are lucky in that we are one of few states where the Constitution requires an adequate public education. There was a recent court hearing in another state where the judge's finding was, I'm sorry, kids, you don't have a right to an adequate education. It's not laid out in state law. It was Ohio or somewhere like that. But Kansas is lucky. We felt the need, many years ago to enact constitutional language that requires us to adequately fund and provide education to children in the state. And I agree that that is still our responsibility, and I agree that it's the Supreme Court's responsibility to analyze whether the funding provisions are in fact adequate and equitable. Thanks.
Okay. And then back to Boog.
Yes, I agree with the court's decision, and no, I do not support a constitutional amendment. I'll start with the second question first. Can you imagine what state our schools would be in today if there was not judicial oversight of public school funding for the last 25 years? Do you think the legislature would be funding? Without judicial oversight, there would be no requirement at all to fund public schools. We could have a privatized education system, or we could have very, very underfunded schools. And I think everybody here understands that a good education system is absolutely critical to the future of our state. And so, no, I don't support a constitutional amendment. I do agree with the court's decision on adequacy and equity. There were two amendments that were offered during the discussion of the school funding bill in the House. One by Democrats. One would have changed the way that inflation was accounted for in considering the total amount of spending, and one that would have raised the amount of special education funding to the 92% level that's established by statute. If both of those things had been passed, I think the Supreme Court would have found that our funding bill was constitutional. But the Democrats supported those bills, the moderate Republicans did not. And I think that's another reason why one of my colleagues to the left needs to be elected next year, even regardless of whether there's a moderate Republican candidate running. Again, I think our schools have been found to be the most efficient in the country. They've been running on very little resources for many years, but they've been doing remarkable things with them. And I think with adequate funding, you can see great results for our kids. I'm really looking forward to it.
All right, thank you. Next question will go first to Mr. Davis. It's a 60-second answer. Question is, do you support reducing or eliminating the state sales tax on food? If yes, how would you accomplish this? If no, why not?
Yes, I absolutely support that, something I've been pushing for a while. Kansas has, we trade off with Mississippi, either the worst or the second worst, highest, that is, sales tax on food in the nation. In general, you're going to pay more tax if you buy liquor than bread in this state. So Rather, I had that backwards. You're going to pay more sales tax on food than you will by the liquor tax. And I think that's shameful. So everybody buys groceries. And so I think that tax benefits everyone, or rather eliminating it. With respect to balancing it out, first of all, we're finally in a position after the Brownback years where we have a budget surplus, where we can consider things like, cutting taxes that help working families. So I'm not as concerned about that. I also think that if necessary, we can institute a slightly higher income tax on the highest brackets, or introduce a new bracket. If we restore it to the pre-Brownback era, we'll actually make up the difference. So.
Okay, Ms. Coster.
I am absolutely in favor of reducing or eliminating the food sales tax. I think it's, if we start moving in that direction, it would not have to come entirely down immediately. We could bring it down step by step as a way to help the state absorb the cost shift, the revenue shift that would happen as a result of reducing and then eliminating the food sales tax. Again, like Stephen said, we are in, for the first time in quite a while, a state of revenue surplus in the state of Kansas, so we have some flexibility. I think there are changes at the national level that unfortunately are going to hit our farmers pretty hard that might not always make that the case going forward unless we get back to 2012 income tax levels and or add an ultra-high third income tax bracket in the state.
Okay, and Mr. Amix.
And I would love to be able to sit here and tell you that I would be in favor of removal of sales tax on food, but the thing that I've got to be able to tell everybody is let's stop and think about the amount of monies that cities and counties have borrowed over time, and with the commitments of sales taxes as those vehicles to be able to pay for those bonds. I think the effect locally on the increase in property tax that, in a majority of cases is going to be passed through to a tenant, or it's going to be passed through to somebody. I guarantee it is going to be extremely high. If there was such a way to be able to do it that it was put into place over time, I think it's something that we absolutely should consider. But I want us to remember the millions and millions of dollars that have been approved by voters just locally that have to be, that there's been a sales tax committed. That is, again, the vehicle that's to pay for it. That's got to be made up somewhere along the line. And I'm not sure that we can honestly use the savings that we have, the monies that we're being brought back, or that are being brought in now to be able to pay for those things. So, anyway.
Okay, and Mr. Hyberger.
It's my understanding that we do have the highest effective rate on food sales tax. Mississippi has a 7% sales tax rate, but they have almost no local sales taxes, and our state level is lower than that, but almost every jurisdiction where food is sold has a higher rate than 7%. So I definitely I would support totally eliminating food sales tax, but for the reasons that Mr. Amix mentioned, I can't do that because of the effect it would have on local jurisdictions. I do support lowering it. I think we've got a number of potential new revenue sources to do that with next year. Although I haven't been able to get solid fiscal notes from legislative research, but internet sales tax is certainly an option. We will certainly be talking about sports gambling, and there's some revenue there. I would concur with Mr. Davis. I would support a fourth higher income tax bracket. And there's something else that's escaping me, but I think we do potentially have, I would support taxing some services. And, never mind.
Okay, thank you. All right, the next question goes first to Ms. Coster. How would, excuse me, it's a 90-second answer on this. How could we improve the criminal justice system at the state level?
I think the first way to improve the criminal justice, well, it's not the first way, but an easy first way to start is to really examine mandatory state sentences for certain kinds of crimes, especially low-level drug crimes, marijuana-related crimes, things like that, where we are forcing judges' hands to sentence people to jail time when maybe that isn't the best option. I would absolutely love to see further statewide effort in support of local court tracks other than just going to criminal court, so mental health courts, things like that, that, you know, we're working on here in Douglas County with great success. It would be nice to have a little bit more state support for those kind of efforts. We have to continue to look at the way citizens are treated by the police, and we need to continue to examine to make sure that we are using justice and equity in the way that anyone that encounters the police is treated, and that's something we still have a lot of work to do on.
Okay, Mr. Amix.
As somebody who owns a barber shop, believe me, this is something that's probably debated, every day. But as somebody who does cut hair and rather than deals with the criminal courts, it's something that I don't know a whole lot about. But I do know one thing is that there's a lot of people that, as I do get, I get to talk to them in the district, is that they have really concern about one of the people that we haven't talked about in the whole issue is our prosecutor, and making sure that what are the priorities that we're really looking at. I know that there's a lot of people that have concerns about somebody who is picked up with possession charge and those kind of things, and those are some of the things that we probably need to talk about on the state level as to what those priorities may be. So for me, it's something that I'm, just trying to learn, the various components of that, and don't have a real clear-cut answer. But I do know one thing: we need to work with our prosecutor and our judges to make sure that we are making sure that the priorities are carried out.
Okay, Mr. Davis.
I would say with respect to criminal justice, one step that we can definitely take is to work on prevention. I think providing a good education, providing an affordable education, job training, vocational, things like that, would be a great start. People that are employed, that are invested in the community, I think are less likely to feel the need to commit crimes. One of the big factors in, there's a few, but one of the big factors is mental health. People that have mental health concerns definitely will reach a crisis if they're not properly treated. That goes back to healthcare, which we've discussed. Also addiction, again, healthcare, people that are addicted to drugs, we need to treat them for their addiction rather than simply putting them in prison where, they may return and then, resume taking drugs. I will say that I do think that marijuana should be legalized. I don't see any reason at this stage to continue putting people in prison for using that, especially when, it's legal in so many other states. The sky has not fallen. And then one that we don't talk about as much is we need to ensure that our court system is properly funded. We need to pay our judges so we get the best people to do that job. We need to pay the court staff so there's less turnover. We need to pay public defenders so that people get their day in court and have the best defense that they can get, rather than simply shoveling a whole bunch onto one poor public defender who has to defend all these cases. We need to ensure that those people have good representation. And I also think that Douglas County has shown a lot of initiative in things like cash-free bond and enabling defendants to do better. So.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Heiberger.
Well, I'm glad to hear this question because this is something that I've gotten to work on for the last 4 years as the ranking Democrat on the Corrections and Juvenile Justice Committee. When I got appointed to that committee, I was really dreading it because I was assuming I would just see a long series of bills that increased criminal penalties. But because our prison system has been at capacity, state law requires the Sentencing Commission to come to us with suggestions for reducing our prison population. So we have actually been able to lower sentences on some crimes, substitute treatment for incarceration for some drug offenses, and to generally use community corrections and other non-prison options for other people. So we've actually made some progress there. Although some of those, the people, when we lower a crime from a felony to a misdemeanor, though, means that those folks are going down to the county level to serve their time. And so we are sort of indirectly putting more pressure on the county. At the request of our county commission, I introduced a bill last year that would take our speedy trial limit back to 90 days from 150 days. That got pushed back from the judicial branch because they don't feel that they have the staff, the resources to process cases that quickly. So again, as one of Mr. Davis mentioned, increased funding for more judges and better funding for our judicial staff is a really critical part of that. Other things that have happened, I think there's a body cam bill that we've been working on for the last few years. That actually passed. You're going to ding me? All right. I could go on, but I'll stop.
Yeah, you were anticipating that, weren't you? Okay. We're coming back to you for the first answer on this next question. It's a 60-second answer. Do you support the legalization of medicinal cannabis in Kansas? Why or why not?
Well, actually, I support legalization of recreational marijuana, but also in the absence of that, I would support medical marijuana legalization. My concerns about medical marijuana is that it comes with such an enormous bureaucracy and burdensome regulation system. I mean, it's a really expensive system to maintain and implement. I think a lot of any revenue that might be generated by the system is going to be sucked up into creating the licensing and regulation infrastructure. So if that's all we can get, I support it, but I would support full recreational use. And when I ran the first time 4 years ago, I did not publicly say that because we had a real live experiment going on next door in Colorado. I said, hey, let's wait a year or two to see how it works out there. Based on Colorado's results, I'm happy to support full legalization at this time.
Okay, Mr. Amix.
Similar to Boog's answer, after reading all the information that I've been given on this, I would have to say that yes, I do support the legalization of medical marijuana. One of the things that probably changed my mind more than anything had to do with a local family that I know very well that had a young son who had need for medicines from medical marijuana. They had to go to Colorado to be able to receive this, so the entire family moves. And one of the things that I found that was incredible about this is that they can't bring the medications back in the state, if I understand it right. And I think that that's the craziest thing that I've ever heard of. I think it absolutely is. And so with that in mind, that is one of the things that happened. I do have a concern about how you administer and the cost of administering, any kind of new program. But, I'm going to hope that this one here is going to pay off. I think it's something that absolutely has to be done. It has to be done now.
Okay, Mr. Davis, I think you answered this question earlier, but you can expand on that.
Oh, that's good. You're not going to take my time away. That's good. Boog took the words right out of my mouth. I absolutely support the legalization of medical marijuana, but even more, I think we can simply legalize marijuana for recreational use as well, as long as it's properly there's proper government oversight, as long as we're taxing in a way that will ensure we continue to bring in revenue. For instance, as prices change or amounts change, things like that. I'm not as concerned about. I appreciate how critical it is for certain people, that need that need cannabis for medical purposes. But I also can appreciate that it's simply not the crisis that it's made out to be. Unfortunately, I'm also aware that we're in Kansas. Kansas did not end prohibition until 1946 or 1948, so we're a little bit behind. But Colorado did it, and I feel like we've seen enough from them that we know that this is something that's doable. So hopefully Kansas catches up.
Okay, Ms. Koster.
I'm going to have to say that I agree with Boog and Stephen. This year, Oklahoma legalized medical marijuana. So I think if Oklahoma can do that, so can Kansas. From the criminal justice standpoint, I think that decriminalizing marijuana recreationally, it just makes sense. It is the joke that goes around is that nobody smokes pot and then goes out and commits a vehicle crime. They smoke pot and they stay home and they watch movies and eat Cheetos, or whatever. It's not. it's not a dangerous activity. Though I will say the one caveat is we don't have a lot of medical research about marijuana because it's been illegal or nearly impossible to legally research it. And I would really love to see more research done on the federal level because I think that we can identify specific things that CBD can help and can treat, and it would be great if we actually gave physicians the knowledge in order to do that.
Okay.
I got a phantom ding that time.
Okay, this next question will go to Mr. Amix first. It's a 60-second answer. Are the current laws governing firearms on state college campuses appropriate? If not, what changes would you support?
First of all, we should not have guns on college campuses. Absolutely not. I do think one of the things that we need to have is that as we look at guns today, I support the Second Amendment. I have my brothers, everybody hunts, but the truth of the matter is that guns on campuses should not be. I think one of the things that we have as we look at especially the conceal and carry laws, the thing that happens is that I think, quite honestly, if we are going to carry a concealed weapon, it needs to be registered, not just from the standpoint of going across state line, but you need to have that permit anywhere in Kansas. So that would be it.
Okay, Mr. Davis.
Yeah, I have, I don't see any reason why we need to have guns in campus buildings, obviously for law enforcement and things like that. One, I hesitate to say silver lining, but when the bill was passed, they did leave a lot up to the Board of Regents, and they did a good job of, I think, enacting a policy that ensures that at least, when there are guns, that there are, a lot of safety restrictions and things for people in dorms. But those, we shouldn't have to worry about that. That's not something where, there was no problem to fix here, but it did sell more guns. So, anytime there's a bill that will increase gun sales, I think you'll find that most of the people in the Kansas legislature are happy to pass it. I'm not. My first goal is always going to be ensuring that firearms are used in a manner that is consistent with the Second Amendment but is safe. And I cannot see a genuine public safety purpose in having guns in campus buildings.
Okay, Ms. Coster.
I am opposed to the idea of having guns on campus. I don't think our current state laws on gun safety are sufficient. Concealed carry should always require a permit and additional training. There should be universal background checks on all gun purchases. It doesn't matter who's selling it to you. If a landlord can do a background check on a prospective tenant, then your neighbor can run a background check if he wants to sell you his shotgun. We should, in addition to not having guns on campus, we shouldn't have guns on school grounds unless they're in the hands of law enforcement. I'm married to a Republican hunter. We have goose sausage and deer summer sausage in my freezer right now. I'm respectful of the Second Amendment, but there is not a need to carry a gun into a classroom. There's not a need to carry a gun into your dorm room.
All right. And Mr. Heiberger.
I support the Second Amendment, but I support the Second Amendment as interpreted by the United States Supreme Court, not as interpreted by the National Rifle Association. In the most recent court decision on the Second Amendment, the Heller case, Judge Scalia was very clear. There is no constitutional right to concealed carry. It doesn't exist. So if anybody tells you that a restriction on concealed carry is infringing their constitutional rights, that is fake news. I support exempting our college campuses from the concealed carry law. There was a bill that was in the legislature last year that would have extended the ability to concealed carry to 18-year-olds, and I opposed that bill. Unfortunately, the Senate leadership at the last minute realized what might happen if they brought that up, and they didn't bring it to a vote. And I guess that bill didn't concern me so much about increased shootings on campus as increased suicides on campus. Because if 18-year-olds can carry a concealed weapon in their dorm rooms, more kids are going to shoot themselves. And there's just, that's pretty unavoidable. I am happy to report that I have received the Moms Demand Action gun sense candidate recognition.
Okay, next question, we'll start with Mr. Davis. If Roe v. Wade is overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court, what would your position be on abortion rights in Kansas based on current Kansas law? 60-minute answer, please, or 60-second answer, excuse me. You could probably go 60 minutes, but 60 seconds is all we have.
I certainly could talk for 60 minutes about it. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, I wouldn't be happy about that. But the state of Kansas the Kansas Supreme Court is still considering a case to determine if our state constitution protects a woman's right to choose. And I think it does. I think that clearly falls within the privacy protections afforded by Sections 1 and 2 of the Kansas Bill of Rights. Having said that, that's not a very popular view in the Kansas State House. So, depending on the outcome of that case, Roe v. Wade may not affect the state. And then at that point, we'd be talking about Kansas for Life pushing for amendment, and I don't even want to think about that. But if it goes the other way, I think the most important thing for us to do as elected representatives is to ensure that these decisions, these medical decisions, are left to doctors and patients. I cannot see a reason, except for scoring political points, to continue having these meaningless votes year after year, just to score political points. I hate it. So in my mind, the less the state is involved, the better. If a doctor says this is medically necessary, it is not my business as a politician to interfere with that.
Okay, Ms. Koster.
So I'm in the, somewhat unique position, though maybe not unique in Lawrence, of being a progressive, pro-choice Catholic. And it's something I'm happy to say out loud no matter where I am. I'm also a woman. I have given birth to 2 kids, and I have had my own share of reproductive health issues because nothing is ever guaranteed, and every pregnancy that makes it all the way to the end is probably represents only half of the pregnancies out there. I don't believe that politicians and lawmakers have any business telling me what I can do with my body, telling my daughters what they can do with their body. It's a medical decision, and I have a healthy amount of respect for physicians, maybe more than a lot of people because of my background, and that's something we need to leave up to them. In addition, if Roe v. Wade were overturned, it would put access to safe, healthy contraception in danger, and that's not workable either.
Okay, next to Mr. Amix.
As someone who has spent a lot of time talking to my staff of volunteers, one of the things that's important to understand, or at least this is my understanding, my colleague on my right will tell me if I'm wrong on this one, I know. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, it will return to the state for the responsibility of the state legislature to come up with a law that is going to decide where we go. I am somebody who believes in pro-choice, as has been said by 2 colleagues to my left. I don't see that we have a responsibility in making medical decisions. One of the things that we talked about, if this item is returned to the state, and one of the things that I have concern about, it seems to me that one of the things that's happening here is we're talking about the criminalization of a woman and possibly her doctor. And I'm here to tell you what, on this matter, there is no way that I would criminalize anybody involved with that decision. This is a decision between a woman and her doctor.
And Mr. Hyper.
Well, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, we're going to be on the front lines of the culture wars, and it's not going to be pretty. Even after the 2016 elections, there are, in the current House, there are less than 30 votes to oppose even the most outrageous restrictions on abortion right now. So unless the makeup of the legislature changes substantially, I'm a little concerned about what's going to happen in Kansas if Roe is overturned. I think the Roe v. Wade is it's a difficult decision. I understand the concerns of the people on the other side of this issue for me. But I think the Roe v. Wade decision was a good compromise between the balance, the interests that are balanced there. I absolutely believe the decision to have an abortion is a medical decision between a woman and her doctor, and the state has no business interfering in it. But it's going to be a challenge to protect that if that decision is overturned. And I will do what I can And hopefully that if the power really is in the state hands, it might make some people rethink their position if they're the ones who are responsible. But
Okay. Starting with Ms. Coster this time. 60-second answer. What endorsements have you received from organizations including PACs?
Okay. And I'm going to apologize in advance if I forget to list any. I have a Moms Demand Action Gun Sense candidate check mark. I have been endorsed by the Kansas Young Democrats. I have been endorsed by the, I will be endorsed by the Kansas National Women's Political Caucus when they are officially granted their existence, which I guess is in limbo. I have been endorsed by Equality Kansas. I have been endorsed by Run for Something. I think Equality Kansas's endorsement is officially a PAC endorsement. And that is all I can think of right this minute.
Okay. Mr. Amix.
Yes, the two that I've been endorsed by are Mainstream Coalition PAC, and I believe the other one is the Engineer and Trainman PAC. So,
Okay. Mr. Davis.
Yes, I've been recognized as a gun sense candidate by Moms Demand Action, and I do believe they're a PAC. The Kansas Young Democrats, which is a political action committee, although they're also kind of a party committee, and Equality Kansas, which is another political action committee. And I think they all do great work. I'm not in the least bit. I'm in fact proud to be associated with all of them. So.
Okay, Mr. Heiberger.
Kansas National Education Association, their PAC, AFL-CIO, and a couple of other labor organizations, Equality Kansas, Mainstream Coalition, and as mentioned before, I've received the Moms Demand Action Gun Safety Candidate Recognition, which is not technically an endorsement.
Okay, very good. All right, we're going back to Mr. Heiberger for the first answer on this question. It's this 90-second answer. The Supreme Court has held that restrictions on the use of the flag in art and protest violate the First Amendment in United States versus Eichmann, 1990. Both Governor Collier and gubernatorial candidate Chris Kobach have suggested that publicly funded institutions should not, quote, promote this type of art. However, it is precisely public institutions like KU that are bound by the U.S. Constitution to refrain from viewpoint censorship. Do you agree with this statement? Why or why not?
Well, I received a comment on this from a constituent a few days ago. He was a conservative young man, and he stated to me that his grandparents had fought for the flag and that he was pretty outraged about what was happening at KU, and he wanted me to be outraged too. And what I wrote back to him is that my father was a veteran also. It's my understanding that what he fought for was the country, this country, and the values of this country as represented by the flag. But one of those values is freedom of speech as guaranteed by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And so I think that the flag art shown at KU is well within the freedom of speech that has been allowed under the U.S. Constitution. And I was disappointed in the decision of the university to take it down. Although I will have to say that personally, I don't like the artwork. I mean, part of my job and part of the job of whoever here is elected was communicating with conservatives. And, you know, the quickest way to shut down a conversation with a conservative is to insult the flag. I mean, I think the artist is absolutely free to create the artwork. I think universities should have complete freedom to display the artwork, but I'm really concerned about the effects of artwork that have on our public discourse, because I think it just helps increase the divisions in our society rather than get around them.
Okay, Mr. Amix.
the artwork, in my opinion, was something that I found pretty offensive. The university ultimately has a decision on whether or not that they are going to continue to display it. Quite honestly, I was glad that it was removed. It was put inside. The other side of the deal is that the Constitution, the Supreme Court does protect, artwork. And as somebody who is very supportive of the Constitution, I understand, this, it's allowed. I mean, it is allowed. And, I've wrestled with this the last few days, but at the same time, the artwork has promoted one thing and what it's supposed to do, and that is discussion. And there are a lot of opinions there, as Boog mentioned a second ago. I also have received comments from a number of conservative friends, and they're very upset about it, because of where they come from and things that they're dealing with in their lives in the past, from losing a member in a war. I can understand. There is some rage there. But in this particular case, I found it, pretty upsetting. But at the same time, it's one of those things. It is the law.
Okay, Mr. Davis?
Here's an inflammatory quote for you. I have burned an American flag, but I was an Eagle Scout, and we were disposing of it properly. And so it's something where, I've kind of come from that background of understanding where that culturally comes from. You have to appreciate, that it is a symbol, that it means a lot. But the Constitution is not just a symbol. It is the document. It's the founding document of our country. And it's more important than the flag, and it should be respected even more than the flag. And I know that sometimes leads to contradictory results, like a flag that has, that appears defaced, that has artwork on it. And that's difficult. And the fact that people are reacting to it, I think, shows why it's so important that we allow it. It's not enough. If everyone agreed that the flag should never be defaced, then we would never have encountered this moment. And this is critical. And to me, what's frustrating is that I know that Governor Collier and Secretary Kobach are not concerned about veterans. They're concerned about using this to get votes. I hate that. For me, I know this is expression, this is artwork, and I know that there are veterans that died for this country and they care about that flag. And all of them can be part of this country, and we can move on from this. But the last thing I want to do is earn votes from it.
And Ms. Coster?
So as has been stated, the First Amendment is critical in protecting our free speech rights. And there are limits on the First Amendment. For instance, you can't yell fire in a movie theater because that creates a serious public safety danger. I don't really believe that the flag artwork created a public safety concern. It created an appearance concern, and that was upsetting to a lot of people. And one of the arguments I heard about it was that the way it was displayed on a flagpole in front of a government building was a violation of the flag code. And that, that may be true. But if we're going to get up in arms about an artistic modification to the United States flag on a flagpole in front of a government building, then we need to get up in arms about blue line flags, and we need to get up in arms about shirts, men's and women's shirts that are designed to look like American flags. I was at the highway rest stop I commute to Topeka every day, and there was a Republican candidate for some office. He had a magnet sticker on the side of his car that proudly proclaimed that, and an American flag men's button-down short-sleeve shirt hanging from the clothes hanger in the back of his car. So we either have to be upset about all of it, or we need to allow the freedom of speech to cover all of it.
Okay. We'll probably take about one more question, and then we'll wrap up here. This will go first to Mr. Davis. The Kansas legislature passed Senate Bill 405, which relaxed environmental standards in order to promote expansion of corporate agriculture and poultry production. Would you support an amendment to allow counties to have local control over the location of these facilities? Why or why not?
How much time do we have on that?
Pardon me?
How much time do we have on that?
Oh, I'm sorry, 60 seconds.
That's okay. So, it's something where, obviously in Douglas County, we're all aware of the No Tyson and Tongi. And it's something where you know, politically, I know that the not in my backyard phenomenon as well. You know, everyone eats chicken, no one wants a chicken plant. So I understand that. However, I will say that Tyson in particular is known for polluting. They're known for leaving a lot of expensive settlements in their wake. Then people have to pick up after them, and the public ultimately pays that cost. So in that sense, I do believe that county should have authority to say this corporate citizen is a bad citizen. And just like any other person in the county, you know, when they misbehave, we have to deal with it. So if they're going to open a plant, I do believe the county should have control over it. It's another one of those bills that frustrates me because I can tell that you can tell who wrote that bill, and I don't think it was the legislator who introduced it, although we might not know who that person was. So in that sense, yes, absolutely the county should have control over it, and I think that when those issues will come up, you know, it'll be pretty clear what the county actually thinks, and in this case, we did not want Tyson here. So.
Okay, Ms. Coster.
Okay, so I'm going to say two things. I agree that the counties should have the ability to exercise control in an issue such as this one. However, I wish that they had not loosened those environmental restrictions. We are at a fairly critical moment also when it comes to our environment, and we have to do, we need to make good efforts as a state to protect the cleanliness of our water, the cleanliness of our air. And so I think that loosening those water protection restrictions to allow closer presence of large poultry operations, et cetera, closer to communities. I wish we had not done that, and I would be in favor of reversing that change also.
Okay, then we need to go to Mr. Amix.
As somebody who's heard so many zoning application and development applications as a member of the county commission, and they actually dealt with environmental issues and all kinds of things that were involved in those applications. The one thing that I absolutely have to say, the only place that those decisions need to be made is at 11th and Massachusetts Street. Those are our local elected officials. They are the ones that know the lay of the land. Obviously, they know where and how those decisions are made. It comes through our Lawrence Douglas County Planning Commission and then goes to the Douglas County Commission. Those are how decisions are made on any type of local application. Absolutely. I only support those decisions being made locally.
Okay, and Mr. Heiberger.
I voted against 405, and I would support a county option. I think in addition to the issue with the separation distance, I mean, this bill specifies how close to a residential dwelling a chicken facility of a certain size can be. It fails to address the property line, distance from the property line that a facility can be located. That's currently done in regulation, and I think it should have been added to the bill. Topeka is full of people who are really upset every time the federal government tells the states what they can or can't do, but there's almost the same people almost universally oppose any change to allow cities and counties to have control over their own destinies. I think this is an issue where I think there are some counties who would like to have the facility for economic development purposes. I think they're willing to put up with negative consequences, but there are many who aren't, and I think they should have the option to say no.
Okay. To kind of close out our forum, we have covered a lot of topics, but if there are any topics that you wanted to talk about that we haven't covered, this will be your opportunity to do that. We'll start with Ms. Coster and give you 90 seconds to close out and raise any other issues you'd like to discuss.
Okay, so I believe I'm the most prepared candidate in this primary for the 45th based on my experience and my education. I have a law degree and a master's in public administration. I currently manage a $6 million budget. I know my way around reading policy, writing policy, and numbers. I have current health policy on the books in the state of Kansas, and that the expanded newborn screening program that tests all newborns in Kansas for 42 inborn conditions. It has not been updated since it was passed in 2007, and medicine has moved a long way. So. Though I have policy on the books, I wish it wasn't still on the books because it's out of date. So if you want somebody who can work on balancing a budget, I'm the person with that experience. And if you want someone who has experience writing and enacting policy, I'm the person that has that experience. And if you want somebody to represent you who's from the 45th district, I am that person. I have lived here in the 45th 28 of my 38 years, including the last 5.5. I'm raising my kids here. I am dedicated to the community, and I would appreciate your consideration. Thank you so much.
Let's just go on down the line to Mr. Davis.
Sure. One issue that we didn't have a chance to talk on, among many, is voting. Unfortunately, Kansas is kind of the national bad example on how to encourage people to vote. Our Secretary of State, Chris Kobach, is a disgrace. I'm not ashamed to say that. And fortunately, he has lost his case in federal court. I'm sure he will lose his appeal, and he may even lose the appeal from that. But he has unfairly burdened the right to vote in this state. The fact that it lasted as long as it did is unfortunate, but I feel like at this point, we can do more going forward. As the legislature comes in next year, I think we have a chance to turn this around rather than continuing to defend this loser law that he has pushed on us. We should enact same-day voter registration. We have the technology to make sure that there is no, chance of voter fraud, that people that register, if they vote provisionally or what have you, that there won't be any duplication, things like that. Our counties are more than capable of handling it. We have the technology. Increasing access to voting by mail, including no excuse permanent advance voting. If it increases turnout, there's no reason not to do it. And I would also like to see the voter ID law repealed. I don't see any particular reason to have that if people are willing to sign the registration book to vote. I believe them. I don't think that we need to be imposing any more burdens on that right. So, and incidentally, you all have the right to vote if you live in the 45th district and you're a Democrat or unaffiliated on August 7th to check the Stephen X. Davis on the ballot. So hope I can count on your vote.
Thank you. Mr. Amix.
Every year, we have the opportunity, or had the opportunity at City Hall and the County Commission to put together legislative priority statements, and I'm sure Boog remembers these. One of the things that was always a strong comment as we met with our delegation over breakfast was to do no harm. And I always thought that was, a funny statement, but at the same time, it's a very serious statement. Because there are so many things that come back from the legislature that have to be picked up by people in Lawrence Douglas County. And I think that is something that I would take to Topeka and do no harm. I want everybody to understand the opportunity that I had to serve, I truly enjoyed. I enjoyed working for people. I enjoyed every minute of being able to serve, whether it be in this building or at the courthouse. Very few people get that opportunity. Very few people have the opportunity to sit in this seat right here. And that was one of the best times that I ever had. Being able to have people come forward and being able to visit with them, help them through their problems, help them to get things done in a way that only some people are able to do. I had the opportunity to work with various people, and I mean, some of them very liberal, some of them very conservative, and it was a great time. But it shows one thing. I had the opportunity to work with those people, and I plan on carrying that to Topeka also. The ability to go across lines, to help make decisions, help get things done, help get our state on track, make things happen, and do no harm. Again, I want to thank the Voter Education Coalition for all the work that they've done in putting together this forum and the forums that they've done in the past and the forums that they'll do in the future. Thank you all very much.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Heiberger.
Well, I want to talk about one more project that I'm really excited about for next year. I introduced a bill on the subject this year. We got an informational hearing. I'm confident that we can move it through and make it happen next year. It's a bill that would create a college savings account at birth for every child born in Kansas. And it's based on research done at KU that shows that just creating an account like that can double a kid's chance of going to college, even if it's never funded after that. And if it is regularly funded, the numbers go up from there. So I worked with a woman named Melinda Lewis at the School of Social Welfare. We put a bill together. It would fund initial startup seed money for low-income kids out of TANF money, which is temporary assistance for needy families. Because of our outrageously restrictive laws here, we don't spend all the TANF money we get from the federal government, so that's available. It would have a tax credit for funding the other accounts, and we would hopefully find private dollars to also help. But I'm the person who administers a 529 account, which is a kind of 529 account. The person who administers these is a state attorney I worked with off and on for years when I was at KDHE. The woman in charge of the data that we need for the program is state registrar, Lou Sadi, who I worked with for 20 years at KDHE. So I'm really well positioned to make this happen. And when Marcy Francisco is elected treasurer, she's fully supportive and excited about this project, so we'll just get it done just like that. It's been a real honor serving for the last 4 years. Thank you for being here today, and ding.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks to everyone for joining the Voter Education Coalition primary forum today, and especially to our candidates for joining us and for running for office. The forum will be available on the city's YouTube channel, so you can refer your friends to a replay of this forum at any time. And we just want to remind everybody that the primary election date is August the 7th, and that advance voting begins this Wednesday, July 17th, and we hope you'll all participate. Thank you very much.